You've been negotiating with reality your entire life without even noticing it. Every time something didn't go the way you expected, your mind quietly began the argument. This shouldn't be happening. This wasn't the plan. Things were supposed to turn out differently. And the moment those thoughts appear, the mind begins fighting a battle it can never win, because reality has already happened. Yet most people spend their days trying to renegotiate what already exists, trying to rewrite the present moment, trying to force life to match the story they created in their minds. And the result is something many people feel but rarely understand: restlessness, frustration, that quiet tension sitting somewhere in the chest, the strange feeling that life is always slightly wrong. But here is the truth very few people are ever told. Calm begins the moment you stop negotiating with reality. Not when life becomes perfect, not when problems disappear, not when people finally behave the way you hoped. Calm appears when the mind stops trying to argue with what already is. For thousands of years, Buddhist teachers have pointed to this same discovery. Suffering is not created by life itself. It is created by the mind resisting life. Every moment the mind says, "This should not be happening," it creates a small storm inside, a silent conflict between expectation and reality. And the more the mind insists, the stronger the storm becomes. But something remarkable happens when that inner argument stops, when the mind pauses, when it quietly recognizes something simple. This is what is happening right now. In that moment, the struggle loosens, the tension softens, and the mind begins to settle like water after a stone has stopped disturbing the surface. Tonight, as you listen to these teachings, something subtle may begin to shift. You may notice how often the mind tries to negotiate with life, how it bargains with pain, how it argues with change, how it clings to how things were supposed to be. And slowly, you may begin to understand something powerful. Peace does not arrive when life finally obeys you. Peace arrives when the mind stops trying to control what cannot be controlled. When the fight against reality finally ends, something unexpected appears: clarity, stability, a calm that does not depend on circumstances. Because the greatest relief a human mind can experience is the moment it stops fighting the present moment. This is the heart of Buddhist acceptance. And once this understanding settles inside you, the world begins to feel very different. The same life, the same challenges, but a completely different mind. Are you ready? Let's begin. Something becomes clear the moment the mind begins to slow down. The tension many people carry has very little to do with what is happening in their lives, and much more to do with the quiet expectations they built long before those moments arrived. Without noticing it, the mind creates a silent blueprint of how life should unfold. It decides how relationships should behave, how success should appear, how people should treat us, and how the future should reward our effort. These expectations become invisible agreements with reality, contracts that reality never signed. The difficulty begins when life refuses to follow those private instructions. What many people experience as disappointment is often something deeper. It is the collapse of an invisible script that was written long ago. That is where the next lesson quietly begins. A strange sadness often appears when life refuses to follow the story people expected. Plans fail, relationships move in directions no one predicted, opportunities vanish without explanation. At first, it feels like life has betrayed something important. But when examined carefully, the real source of pain is often not the event itself. The pain comes from the distance between what happened and what the mind believed should have happened. Long before events unfold, the mind quietly writes a script. It imagines the timeline of success. It pictures the shape of relationships. It predicts how certain efforts will be rewarded. These imagined outcomes begin to feel real, even though they exist only in thought. When reality later moves in a different direction, the mind experiences the moment as a violation. Something feels wrong, even though nothing in the natural order of life has actually been broken. This is one of the most subtle illusions human beings live inside. People rarely realize they are comparing reality to a story that never existed outside their own expectations. The moment comparison begins, calm disappears. The mind begins to protest, argue, analyze, and replay events again and again. Each repetition strengthens the belief that life should have unfolded differently. Buddhist teachings speak often about this habit of the mind. They explain that suffering frequently grows from attachment to imagined outcomes. The problem is not hope or planning. Those can be useful. The problem begins when imagined outcomes quietly turn into emotional demands. The mind no longer sees them as possibilities. It begins to treat them as promises life was supposed to keep. When those promises are broken, frustration appears. Yet life itself did not create those promises. The mind created them. This explains why two people can experience the same event and feel completely different emotions. One person may see an unexpected change as an inconvenience. Another may see it as a disaster. The difference is rarely the event itself. The difference is the strength of the script that existed before the event arrived. Many people carry these scripts for years without realizing it. A person may believe that hard work guarantees success. Another may believe that loyalty guarantees lasting relationships. Someone else may believe that kindness guarantees fairness from others. These ideas may sound reasonable, but life rarely operates according to neat emotional equations. Reality is not a system designed to fulfill personal expectations. It moves according to countless causes and conditions that no single person controls. When the mind refuses to accept this, tension grows quietly in the background of everyday life. Every unexpected event begins to feel like evidence that something has gone wrong. The mind begins searching for explanations, blaming circumstances, other people, or itself. But Buddhist wisdom points to a different direction. It suggests looking not at the event itself, but at the expectation that existed before it. When that expectation becomes visible, something interesting happens. The mind begins to realize that much of its frustration came from comparing life to an imagined version of how it was supposed to unfold. This realization can feel uncomfortable at first. The mind often resists letting go of its private scripts. Those stories provide a sense of control. They create the illusion that life can be predicted if the right effort is applied. But over time, it becomes clear that holding those scripts too tightly creates more suffering than clarity. Life unfolds through change, uncertainty, and countless influences that no individual can fully manage. When expectations try to impose rigid structure on that movement, conflict appears. The quiet relief people search for often begins when this comparison slowly fades. When the mind stops asking why reality did not match its imagined version, it begins to see the present moment more clearly. Events become simpler. Situations no longer carry the heavy weight of what they were supposed to be. Instead, they appear as they are. This shift may sound small, but it changes the emotional landscape of the mind. Energy that was once spent arguing with reality becomes available again. The endless replaying of events begins to quiet down. Calm starts to appear in spaces where tension once lived. Many people discover this during moments when they finally stop asking certain questions. Questions like, why did this happen to me? Or why didn't life work out the way it should have? When those questions lose their urgency, the mind becomes lighter. The present moment stops feeling like an opponent that must be corrected. This does not mean becoming passive or indifferent. Acceptance in Buddhist teachings is often misunderstood in this way. Accepting reality does not mean approving of every event or refusing to take action when change is possible. Instead, it means recognizing the difference between reality itself and the story the mind created around it. When that difference becomes visible, a quiet freedom appears. The mind no longer has to force life into a particular shape before it allows itself to feel calm. People who learn this lesson often notice something surprising. The moment they stop demanding that life follow a specific script, their ability to respond wisely actually improves. When the mind is no longer clouded by disappointment or resistance, it becomes easier to see what the present situation truly requires. Clarity replaces frustration. This clarity also softens the emotional shock of change. Life constantly evolves in ways that no one can fully predict. Relationships shift, goals evolve, circumstances transform. When the mind insists that everything remain consistent with its original expectations, each change feels like a personal loss. But when expectations loosen, change begins to feel less threatening. It becomes part of the natural movement of life, rather than evidence that something has gone wrong. Buddhist teachers often compare this understanding to standing beside a river. The water is constantly moving, never repeating the same shape twice. Trying to freeze the river in place would be impossible. Yet many people attempt something similar with life itself. They try to preserve moments, relationships, and outcomes exactly as they imagined them. The moment reality moves forward, they experience that movement as loss. But when the mind stops trying to freeze the river, something remarkable happens. The flow becomes beautiful instead of threatening. Each moment becomes something to observe rather than something to control. This shift does not remove all difficulty from life. Painful events still occur, loss still happens, challenges still appear. The difference is that the mind no longer adds an extra layer of suffering by insisting that those events should not exist. This is where calm quietly begins. Not because life has become easier, but because the mind has stopped fighting what is already here. Many people spend years chasing peace through external changes. They try to organize their lives so perfectly that nothing unexpected can disturb their emotional balance. But the world rarely cooperates with that plan. Unexpected events will always appear. Other people will continue to make unpredictable choices. Circumstances will change without warning. Peace built on perfect conditions can never remain stable. But peace built on acceptance has a different foundation. It does not require life to behave in a particular way before calm is allowed to exist. Instead, calm appears the moment the mind releases its demand that reality follow its script. At first, this release may feel like giving something up. The mind may believe it is losing control or abandoning hope. But with time, a deeper understanding begins to grow. What is actually being released is not control, because that control never truly existed. What is being released is the illusion that life was supposed to follow a specific storyline. Once that illusion loosens, the present moment becomes easier to inhabit. Attention shifts away from imagined versions of the future and begins to settle in what is actually happening. This is where awareness becomes powerful. Without the constant comparison between reality and expectation, the mind becomes more attentive. It begins to notice details that were previously hidden beneath layers of frustration. The sound of a quiet moment, the rhythm of breathing, the small movements of daily life that were once ignored while the mind was busy arguing with how things should have been. Acceptance reveals these details because the mind is no longer distracted by resistance. This is why Buddhist teachings often describe acceptance not as surrender, but as clarity. It removes the distortion created by expectations and allows reality to appear as it truly is. And within that clarity, calm grows naturally. There is no need to force it, no need to chase it. Calm emerges because the conflict between life and expectation has finally softened. The mind begins to understand something simple but profound. Life was never obligated to follow the script it imagined. Once this becomes clear, the pressure to constantly correct reality fades away. What remains is a quieter relationship with life, one that allows events to unfold without immediate judgment. one that no longer treats every unexpected moment as a mistake. And in that space, the mind becomes ready to see another important truth about acceptance. Something subtle begins to appear once the mind recognizes the illusion of the life it expected. The comparison between reality and expectation slowly loses its grip. Yet, even after that realization, another habit quietly continues beneath the surface. The mind may no longer cling so tightly to the script it once believed in, but it still reacts to the present moment with a kind of resistance that is easy to overlook. This resistance does not always appear as anger or obvious frustration. Sometimes it shows up as quiet tension, a tightening inside the chest, or a constant feeling that something about this moment should be different. And that quiet resistance reveals another truth that Buddhist teachings have observed for centuries. Much of human suffering grows from the simple act of arguing with the present moment. Something curious happens the moment the mind decides that what is happening right now should not be happening. The body may still be sitting in the same room, breathing the same air, surrounded by the same conditions, yet inside the mind, a conflict begins. A silent battle starts between what exists and what the mind wishes existed instead. This conflict is so common that many people no longer recognize it as a struggle. It feels normal, yet beneath that normal feeling is a constant pressure that slowly drains energy and clarity. The mind has a remarkable ability to resist the present moment in ways that appear invisible. A person wakes up to a rainy morning and immediately thinks the weather should have been better. Someone receives criticism and believes the conversation should not have happened that way. Plans change unexpectedly, and the mind insists that the day was supposed to unfold differently. These reactions may seem harmless, but each one begins the same internal process. Reality presents itself exactly as it is, and the mind responds by mentally rejecting it. This rejection does not change reality. The rain continues to fall, the conversation remains spoken, the event remains part of the past, but the mind continues its protest, as if reality might reverse itself if the resistance becomes strong enough. This is where tension begins to grow. Buddhist teachings often describe this tension as a second layer of suffering added on top of life itself. Events occur naturally. Some are pleasant, some are painful, and many are neutral. But the mind often refuses to allow those events to exist without commentary. It evaluates them immediately. It labels them unfair, inconvenient, disappointing, or unacceptable. Each label strengthens the feeling that something about the moment is wrong. When this habit repeats itself day after day, a person begins to feel surrounded by constant irritation. The world seems full of problems that should not exist. Yet the deeper cause of that irritation often has very little to do with the events themselves. The real source is the mind's constant argument with what is already happening. Arguing with reality is like trying to push against a wall that will never move. The effort consumes energy, but the wall remains exactly where it was. Over time, the body begins to feel tired, even though nothing physical has changed. The exhaustion comes from fighting a battle that cannot be won. Many people live inside this struggle without ever recognizing it. They believe their stress comes from their job, their relationships, their responsibilities, or the unpredictable nature of life. These factors certainly create challenges, but the deeper tension often grows from the mind's refusal to allow those circumstances to exist without resistance. The moment something uncomfortable appears, the mind reacts with rejection. This should not be happening. Things should be different. Why did this happen now? Why did this happen to me? Each thought continues the internal battle. Buddhist philosophy teaches that the present moment cannot be changed through mental resistance. Once something has happened, the only power the mind has is how it responds. Yet the mind often behaves as if its protest might somehow alter the reality that has already arrived. This creates a strange situation where people spend enormous amounts of mental energy trying to correct something that cannot be corrected in that moment. Consider how often this occurs during a typical day. Traffic slows down unexpectedly. The mind complains that the road should be clear. A message arrives containing criticism or disagreement. The mind argues that the other person should understand things differently. A plan fails to produce the expected result. The mind insists the effort should have guaranteed success. Each of these reactions appears quickly, often before the person even notices the tension forming, but the body notices. The shoulders tighten, the breathing becomes shallow. The mind begins replaying the situation again and again, searching for a version of events that would feel more acceptable. Yet the present moment continues exactly as it is. Buddhist teachers describe this pattern as a kind of hidden violence inside the mind. The word violence may sound dramatic, but it reflects the intensity of the conflict that occurs when the mind refuses to allow reality to exist. Violence does not always appear as physical force. It can also appear as internal resistance, as the mind repeatedly pushing against the shape of the present moment. This inner struggle creates friction within the mind, and friction always generates heat. This heat shows up as stress, anxiety, irritation, and exhaustion. People often believe these emotions come from the world around them, but the deeper source is frequently the mind's refusal to allow life to unfold without protest. When the mind stops arguing with the moment, something surprising begins to happen. The tension that once seemed unavoidable starts to dissolve. Not because the circumstances changed, but because the struggle against them ended. This shift can feel unusual at first. Many people have spent years believing that resisting unpleasant events is a necessary part of staying in control. They fear that acceptance means giving up or allowing problems to continue without action. But acceptance in Buddhist teachings does not mean approving of everything that happens. It simply means acknowledging the reality that already exists before deciding what to do next. There is a powerful difference between these two states of mind. Resistance says this moment should not exist. Acceptance says this moment exists. The first creates conflict. The second creates clarity. Once clarity appears, wise action becomes easier. A person stuck in resistance reacts impulsively. They argue, complain, blame, or mentally replay events without reaching any understanding. But a person who accepts the reality of the moment can examine the situation without distortion. They see the event as it is rather than as it should have been. This simple shift removes a tremendous amount of unnecessary suffering. The mind becomes quieter. The body relaxes. Attention returns to what can actually be influenced rather than what cannot be changed. Another important insight emerges from this practice. Many of the situations that provoke resistance are not truly threatening. They are simply uncomfortable or unexpected. The mind reacts strongly because it has been conditioned to treat discomfort as a problem that must be eliminated immediately. But discomfort is not always harmful. Sometimes it is simply part of life moving in directions that were not predicted. When the mind learns to allow discomfort without immediately resisting it, emotional stability begins to grow. The moment still contains challenges, but it no longer contains the extra suffering created by internal conflict. This understanding changes the way people experience everyday situations. A delayed train becomes an inconvenience rather than a personal insult from the universe. A disagreement becomes a difference of perspective rather than evidence that the relationship is broken. A mistake becomes information rather than proof of failure. The events remain the same, but the emotional weight attached to them becomes lighter. Buddhist practice often encourages observing the mind during moments of resistance. Instead of immediately reacting, attention turns inward to notice the thoughts forming around the event. The mind may say, "This should not be happening." At that moment, awareness simply notices the thought without believing it completely. This observation creates a small distance between the event and the reaction. Within that distance, calm begins to grow. The person recognizes that reality has already arrived, and that arguing with it only prolongs suffering. The mind begins to understand that its resistance has been adding unnecessary weight to each situation. This realization does not happen instantly. The habit of arguing with reality has been practiced for years, sometimes decades, but with patience, the mind slowly learns a new response. Instead of fighting every moment that feels uncomfortable, it begins to allow those moments to exist. And when that happens, something remarkable occurs. Life feels less heavy. The world no longer appears filled with endless problems that need immediate correction. Instead, experiences unfold with a natural rhythm that can be observed and responded to without panic. Calm emerges not because life has become perfectly arranged, but because the internal battle against life has stopped. This calm has a quiet strength. It does not depend on favorable circumstances. It appears whenever the mind releases its argument with the present moment. The more often this release happens, the more stable the mind becomes. Gradually, a person begins to notice that much of the suffering they once carried was created by the invisible habit of resisting what already existed. Once that habit softens, the present moment becomes less threatening. The mind learns that it does not need to fight every uncomfortable experience in order to survive it. And with that understanding, another doorway into acceptance quietly opens. As the mind slowly learns to stop fighting the present moment, another quiet discovery begins to surface. Even when resistance fades, something else continues operating beneath awareness. The mind still carries an old habit that shapes how reality is seen. Events rarely arrive in the mind exactly as they happened. Instead, they pass through a subtle filter made of memories, expectations, fears, and desires. This filter quietly rewrites what took place, turning simple moments into complex stories. And once those stories take hold, the mind begins reacting not to reality itself, but to the version it created. This reveals another important truth that Buddhist teachings have long observed. The mind constantly reshapes reality through the stories it tells itself. A quiet curiosity appears when someone begins paying attention to the way the mind interprets events. The world outside may be simple and direct, yet inside the mind, every event quickly becomes part of a larger narrative. A single sentence spoken by another person can transform into a long chain of assumptions. A small mistake can grow into a story about personal failure. A delayed message from a friend can turn into worry about rejection or conflict. These stories form quickly, often before the mind even realizes it is creating them. This process happens so naturally that many people believe the story is the event itself. They assume that what they feel must be the truth of what happened. But Buddhist teachings invite a deeper look. They suggest that the mind rarely experiences reality without adding its own interpretation first. Instead of seeing events clearly, the mind immediately reshapes them to match existing beliefs, fears, and desires. This habit begins early in life. From childhood onward, the mind learns to interpret situations based on past experiences. If someone has been criticized frequently, the mind becomes sensitive to signs of disapproval. If someone has experienced betrayal, the mind becomes quick to detect potential threats in relationships. These patterns develop slowly, but once they form, they influence how nearly every event is understood. When something happens, the mind rarely asks what actually occurred. Instead, it quickly asks what this event means. Meaning is created through personal stories, and those stories often contain far more imagination than reality. Buddhist philosophy describes two powerful forces that shape these interpretations. One is craving, the mind's desire for certain outcomes, experiences, or identities. The other is aversion, the mind's attempt to avoid discomfort, loss, or unpleasant emotions. Together, these forces quietly distort perception. When craving is present, the mind looks for evidence that supports what it wants to be true. It highlights signs of success, approval, or opportunity. At the same time, it may ignore details that suggest uncertainty or difficulty. The mind builds a hopeful narrative that makes reality appear more favorable than it may actually be. Aversion works in the opposite direction. When the mind fears pain or rejection, it searches for signs of danger. A neutral comment may suddenly feel like criticism. A minor problem may appear catastrophic. The mind constructs a story that magnifies potential threats. Neither of these interpretations reflects reality clearly. Both are shaped by emotional preferences rather than by direct observation. This is why two people can witness the same situation and walk away with completely different conclusions. Each mind filters the event through its own patterns of craving and aversion. The result is not objective truth, but a personalized version of reality. Consider how quickly the mind rewrites events during everyday conversations. Someone may speak briefly without much emotion. One listener interprets the tone as calm and neutral. Another listener perceives it as distant or cold. A third listener feels the words were slightly critical. The event itself may have been simple, but each mind reshapes it according to its internal patterns. These interpretations then influence emotional reactions. If the story created by the mind suggests rejection, sadness may follow. If the story suggests disrespect, anger may arise. Yet, the emotional reaction often comes not from the event itself, but from the story built around it. Buddhist teachings encourage people to notice this difference. They invite a pause between the moment something happens and the moment the mind begins explaining it. Within that pause, a person may discover that many of the conclusions forming in the mind are assumptions rather than facts. This discovery can be surprising. The mind often presents its stories with great confidence. Thoughts appear convincing and urgent, as if they must be true simply because they feel real. But feelings do not always reflect accurate perception. Once someone begins observing the storytelling habit of the mind, a deeper clarity begins to emerge. They realize that the mind is constantly editing reality. It removes certain details, emphasizes others, and arranges them into a narrative that feels meaningful. This editing process may serve a purpose. Stories help people organize experiences and understand the world. But when these stories are mistaken for reality itself, confusion begins to grow. The mind becomes trapped inside its own interpretations. Instead of responding to the present moment, a person reacts to the story they believe about that moment. Buddhist wisdom suggests that freedom begins when this storytelling process becomes visible. When a thought arises explaining what something means, awareness quietly observes it without immediately accepting it as truth. For example, a person may notice the thought, "That person ignored me because they are upset with me." Instead of believing the thought instantly, awareness simply recognizes it as a possible interpretation. Another possibility may exist. The person may have been distracted. They may not have heard the greeting. They may have been thinking about something unrelated. By recognizing the mind's habit of constructing stories, a person begins to see events with greater openness. The need to defend one particular interpretation begins to soften. This openness creates emotional space. Instead of reacting immediately with fear or anger, the mind becomes curious. What actually happened? What assumptions am I making? Is there another explanation? These questions do not weaken the mind. They strengthen clarity. They allow the person to interact with reality more directly rather than through layers of interpretation. Buddhist practice often describes this shift as moving from conceptual thinking to direct observation. Conceptual thinking involves building stories about events. Direct observation focuses on what can actually be seen, heard, or experienced in the moment. When someone observes directly, they notice the tone of a voice without assuming the intention behind it. They notice a change in plans without immediately turning it into a story about personal failure. They notice discomfort without labeling it as unbearable. This practice gradually dissolves unnecessary drama. Drama often grows from the distance between events and the interpretations attached to them. When that distance shrinks, the mind becomes calmer. Life feels simpler. The world appears less threatening because the mind is no longer amplifying every situation through fear or desire. Another important insight arises through this process. Many of the stories the mind creates are attempts to maintain a sense of personal identity. People develop ideas about who they are and how the world should respond to them. When events challenge these identities, the mind quickly constructs explanations that protect its self-image. If someone sees themselves as competent, a mistake may trigger a story about unfair circumstances rather than acknowledging the error. If someone believes they are unlikable, a neutral interaction may be interpreted as rejection. In both cases, the mind reshapes reality to defend its identity. Buddhist teachings gently challenge this habit. They encourage observing how identity influences perception. When this influence becomes visible, the mind becomes less rigid. Experiences are allowed to exist without immediately confirming or threatening a personal story about the self. This flexibility creates emotional stability. The mind no longer needs to rewrite every event to maintain a certain identity. It becomes more comfortable, allowing reality to appear as it is. With this shift, acceptance becomes easier. Acceptance does not require perfect understanding of every situation. It simply requires seeing events without excessive distortion. When the mind stops rewriting reality through personal stories, the present moment becomes clearer. A disagreement remains a disagreement rather than proof of betrayal. A mistake remains a mistake rather than evidence of personal inadequacy. A challenge becomes an opportunity for response rather than a threat to identity. This clarity reduces emotional intensity. The mind begins to experience events more directly and with less unnecessary drama. Drama thrives on interpretation. It grows stronger when the mind builds elaborate narratives about what things mean. But when awareness recognizes these narratives as temporary thoughts rather than absolute truth, their power fades. The mind becomes quieter. Thoughts still appear, but they are seen as passing interpretations rather than permanent conclusions. This quiet mind responds to life differently. Instead of reacting impulsively, it observes first. Instead of assuming the worst, it remains open to multiple possibilities. Instead of defending personal stories, it focuses on what is actually present. This shift transforms daily experiences. Conversations become clearer, decisions become calmer, relationships become less burdened by misunderstandings created by imagined stories. Life begins to feel more spacious because the mind is no longer crowded with endless interpretations. And within that spaciousness, acceptance grows naturally. Reality no longer needs to be rewritten in order to feel acceptable. It can simply be seen. When the mind reaches this level of clarity, it begins to understand another quiet truth about human experience. As the mind begins to see how easily it rewrites reality through its own stories, another layer of understanding slowly appears. Even when the stories quiet down, there is still a deep expectation hiding beneath many reactions. It is the belief that life should unfold with fairness, that effort should be rewarded, kindness should be returned, Honesty should be respected, and good intentions should lead to good outcomes. This belief feels natural and comforting, but when reality refuses to follow this pattern, something heavy begins to grow inside the mind. A quiet bitterness appears, a feeling that something in the world is fundamentally wrong. And that feeling reveals another truth that Buddhist teachings have observed for centuries. Much of human suffering grows from the silent demand that life must be fair. There is a certain shock that many people experience when life refuses to behave according to the rules they believed in. A person works hard for years and still loses an opportunity. Someone treats others with kindness but receives betrayal in return. A dishonest individual seems to succeed while an honest one struggles quietly. These moments create a deep sense of injustice inside the mind. The reaction feels immediate and powerful. Something about the situation feels unacceptable. The mind begins searching for explanations. It wants to restore balance. It wants to believe that somehow the world will correct the imbalance and fairness will eventually appear. But the more closely one observes life, the more complicated that belief becomes. Nature itself does not operate through fairness. Storms do not choose where they land based on who deserves difficulty. Illness does not select its targets by measuring kindness or morality. Opportunities appear in places that do not always correspond to effort or character. Events unfold through countless conditions that exist far beyond individual control. When the mind expects life to operate according to a system of moral symmetry, every imbalance becomes a source of emotional pain. A person may feel anger when someone undeserving appears to benefit from circumstances. Another may feel deep discouragement when their own effort fails to produce the outcome they believed was guaranteed. These reactions grow from the same expectation: the belief that reality should distribute outcomes in proportion to merit. But Buddhist teachings gently question this belief. They suggest that the universe does not function as a judge distributing rewards and punishments in real time. Life unfolds through causes and conditions that are often invisible and interconnected in ways no individual can fully understand. This perspective does not deny the importance of ethical living. It does not say that actions have no consequences. Instead, it encourages a deeper recognition that consequences often unfold in complex and unpredictable ways. When someone expects fairness to appear immediately, disappointment becomes inevitable. Consider how often frustration arises from this expectation. A person may think, "I did everything right, so why did this still happen?" Another may ask, "Why do good people suffer while dishonest ones succeed?" These questions arise from the assumption that life must follow a clear moral accounting system, but reality rarely presents outcomes in such a simple way. The moment the mind insists that every event must follow the rule of fairness, it begins judging life itself. And life rarely passes that test. This constant evaluation creates tension. The mind begins measuring every experience according to whether it feels fair. When situations appear balanced, the mind feels satisfied. When they do not, resentment begins to grow. Resentment is one of the quiet forms of suffering that can remain hidden for years. It often grows slowly, feeding on repeated experiences where life did not match the mind's expectations. A person may carry the belief that they deserved recognition that never arrived. Another may hold on to the feeling that someone else was rewarded unfairly. Over time, these beliefs can become part of a person's emotional identity. But Buddhist wisdom suggests another way of looking at these experiences. Instead of demanding fairness from life, it encourages observing life as it actually unfolds. This observation does not deny that injustice exists. It simply acknowledges that reality is not obligated to organize itself around human ideas of fairness. When this understanding settles into the mind, something begins to change. The emotional pressure to constantly judge life begins to fade. Instead of asking why events are unfair, the mind begins asking a different question. Given what has happened, what is the wisest response now? This shift is subtle but powerful. The first question leads to frustration because it focuses on something that cannot be changed. The second question focuses on the present moment and the actions still available. The mind moves from protest to clarity. Clarity reveals that fairness is not always the foundation of peace. Peace often emerges when the mind stops demanding that life justify itself. This understanding does not make a person passive. It does not encourage ignoring injustice or avoiding meaningful action. Instead, it removes the emotional burden created by expecting the world to behave according to a personal moral design. When that burden fades, a person can still work toward improvement in the world, but they do so without the bitterness that comes from unmet expectations. They understand that their responsibility lies in their actions, not in controlling how the universe distributes outcomes. This perspective creates a quiet resilience. A person who no longer demands fairness from every event becomes less vulnerable to disappointment. When challenges appear, the mind does not collapse into resentment. Instead, it observes the situation and adapts. This flexibility allows emotional stability to grow. Another insight begins to appear when someone examines the idea of fairness more closely. Human judgments about fairness often depend on perspective. What appears unfair to one person may appear justified to another. Two individuals involved in the same conflict may both believe they have been treated unfairly. Each mind interprets the situation through its own experiences and expectations. This shows how subjective the concept of fairness can be. If emotional peace depends on every situation aligning perfectly with one person's definition of fairness, peace will remain fragile. But if peace grows from accepting that life will sometimes appear uneven, it becomes far more stable. Buddhist teachings often encourage compassion as a response to these realities. When the mind no longer focuses on judging fairness in every moment, it becomes easier to recognize the shared vulnerability of human life. Everyone experiences loss, confusion, and unexpected difficulty. The person who seems fortunate today may face hardship tomorrow. Circumstances shift constantly in ways that no one can fully control. This recognition softens the impulse to compare outcomes. Instead of asking why someone else succeeded or failed, the mind begins to understand that life's movements are complex and often unpredictable. Within this understanding, a deeper form of calm appears. It is a calm that does not depend on the world behaving according to personal expectations. It is a calm rooted in the acceptance that life unfolds through countless causes and conditions beyond individual control. Once this perspective grows stronger, the emotional grip of unfairness loosens. A person may still recognize injustice when it appears, but they no longer carry the expectation that life must correct every imbalance immediately. They focus instead on living wisely within the reality that exists. This approach removes a tremendous amount of emotional weight. The mind becomes less preoccupied with comparing outcomes and more attentive to how each moment can be met with clarity and compassion. Over time, bitterness begins to dissolve. The energy once spent resenting life's unevenness becomes available for understanding, creativity, and meaningful action. Peace grows quietly in that space. It grows not because the world has suddenly become fair, but because the mind has stopped demanding that fairness must appear before calm is allowed to exist. This freedom is subtle but profound. The mind no longer feels trapped in endless judgment. Reality is allowed to unfold as it does, while the person focuses on responding with awareness rather than resentment. This shift opens the door to a deeper stability. And as the mind continues to release its expectations about how life should behave, another quiet insight begins to emerge about the nature of control itself. As the mind slowly releases its demand for fairness, another expectation quietly begins to reveal itself. Beneath the surface of many frustrations lives a deeper desire that most people rarely question. It is the desire for life to be orderly, predictable, structured in ways that feel safe and understandable. People want events to follow clear sequences. They want causes to lead neatly to effects. They want effort to produce visible progress. And when life refuses to follow this orderly structure, something inside the mind begins to panic. Confusion appears, anxiety grows. Yet Buddhist teachings point to another truth that becomes clearer with observation. Reality has never promised to be neat, and much suffering begins when the mind insists that it must be. A quiet discomfort often arises when situations feel uncertain or disorganized. The mind prefers clarity. It wants to know what will happen next. It wants patterns that make the world easier to navigate. These preferences developed for survival. Predictable environments helped early humans avoid danger and find stability. But the modern mind has carried this preference into every part of life, even into situations where uncertainty is unavoidable. When events unfold smoothly, the mind feels comfortable. Plans succeed. Conversations go as expected. Goals move forward with visible progress. But the moment life becomes complicated or unpredictable, the mind begins searching for ways to restore order. It asks questions repeatedly. Why is this happening? What went wrong? How can this be fixed immediately? Sometimes these questions lead to useful action, but often they create something else instead. Tension created by the refusal to accept that life sometimes moves through periods of disorder. The world itself is filled with unpredictable movements. Weather shifts suddenly. Opportunities appear and disappear without warning. Relationships evolve in ways no one fully anticipates. Even the human body changes over time in ways that cannot always be controlled. Yet the mind often expects these processes to follow tidy patterns. A person may believe their career should progress in a straight line. They expect each year to bring steady advancement. When reality brings unexpected detours, the mind interprets this as failure rather than as part of life's natural unpredictability. Another person may believe that relationships should remain emotionally stable once trust has been established. When misunderstandings arise, the mind feels shocked, as if the disorder itself is evidence that something is deeply wrong. But Buddhist philosophy invites people to look more closely at how existence actually unfolds. Nature itself rarely follows rigid structure. A forest grows in tangled patterns rather than perfect rows. Rivers shift their course gradually over time. Weather systems form and dissolve in unpredictable ways. Even within the human body, countless processes occur simultaneously without any single system controlling every outcome. The heart beats, cells regenerate, and neural signals travel through the brain in complex patterns that no conscious mind manages directly. Life has always contained a degree of disorder. Yet the human mind often reacts to disorder as if it were a mistake rather than a natural part of existence. This reaction creates unnecessary suffering. When the mind demands order from situations that are inherently uncertain, frustration grows quickly. A person may spend hours trying to organize a problem that has no immediate solution. They replay conversations, analyze possibilities, and imagine alternative outcomes that would feel more structured. But reality remains exactly as it is. The mind's struggle to impose order does not necessarily make the situation clearer. In many cases, it simply adds emotional pressure. Buddhist teachings describe this pattern as attachment to certainty. The mind clings to the idea that life should make sense at all times. It wants a clear path forward and a reliable explanation for every event. Yet clarity often appears only after a period of confusion. Consider how many meaningful changes in life begin with uncertainty. A new career may start with doubts and unpredictable challenges. A personal transformation may begin during a period when the future feels unclear. Even learning new skills often involves moments where progress appears messy and inconsistent. The mind tends to interpret these messy stages as signs of failure, but they are often part of the natural process of growth. When someone learns to allow these stages without panic, emotional stability begins to grow. This does not mean ignoring problems or refusing to organize life when organization is helpful. It means recognizing that some periods of uncertainty cannot be solved immediately. Instead of fighting that uncertainty, the mind begins to move through it patiently. Patience becomes a form of strength. A patient mind does not collapse when plans change unexpectedly. It adapts, it observes, it allows time for situations to develop before rushing to conclusions. This patience reduces anxiety because it removes the pressure to force clarity before it naturally appears. Another important insight emerges from this perspective. Much of the stress people experience during uncertain moments comes from the belief that they must understand everything immediately. They want answers now, they want explanations now, they want solutions now. But life often unfolds in stages that reveal meaning gradually. The mind's demand for instant order interrupts this natural unfolding. When the mind relaxes its demand for immediate understanding, curiosity begins to replace anxiety. Curiosity allows a person to observe the unfolding of events without assuming that confusion must be eliminated instantly. This shift creates emotional flexibility. Instead of viewing messy situations as threats, the mind begins to see them as part of the dynamic movement of life. Another change follows this shift. When someone no longer demands perfect structure from every situation, they become less afraid of uncertainty. Fear of uncertainty often grows from the belief that disorder automatically leads to disaster. But many uncertain situations resolve themselves over time through processes that cannot be predicted in advance. A person who allows this process to unfold becomes more resilient. Resilience means remaining steady even when circumstances feel unclear. It means trusting that clarity will eventually appear without forcing the situation into premature conclusions. Buddhist practice often encourages staying present during these uncertain periods. Instead of projecting far into the future, attention returns to the immediate moment. Breathing continues, small tasks are completed, conversations happen naturally. The mind learns that life can still be lived fully even when larger questions remain unanswered. This understanding softens the urgency that often accompanies uncertainty. The mind no longer believes that peace depends on solving every puzzle immediately. Instead, peace grows from the willingness to move forward even while some parts of the path remain unclear. This approach transforms how people experience difficult periods in life. A career change becomes an exploration rather than a crisis. A relationship challenge becomes an opportunity for understanding rather than evidence of collapse. A personal setback becomes information rather than proof that life has lost its structure. The events themselves may still contain difficulty, but the mind experiences them with far less panic. Over time, a person begins to see that many of the most meaningful developments in life emerged from moments that once appeared chaotic. New opportunities often arise during times when the future feels uncertain. Creative ideas appear when the mind allows space rather than forcing rigid plans. Personal growth happens when old patterns break apart and new perspectives slowly form. These processes rarely look neat while they're unfolding. They look messy, but that messiness is often part of transformation. When the mind accepts this reality, its relationship with uncertainty changes completely. Uncertainty becomes less frightening and more like an open field of possibilities. This does not mean that every uncertain situation leads to positive outcomes. Difficult events still occur. Loss still happens. Challenges still appear without warning. But the mind learns that it does not need to control every stage of life's unfolding in order to remain calm. Calm becomes rooted in the ability to remain steady even when circumstances lack clear structure. This steadiness grows stronger each time the mind allows life to be messy without demanding immediate order. The more often this happens, the more natural the acceptance becomes. Eventually, the mind begins to trust the process of life itself. It understands that clarity, growth, and understanding often emerge from situations that initially appear confusing. And with that trust, emotional stability deepens. The mind becomes less reactive, less anxious, and more open to the natural movement of experience. Life continues to unfold in complex and unpredictable ways, but the mind no longer tries to force every moment into a perfectly organized structure. Instead, it moves with the flow of events, observing carefully and responding wisely when the time is right. In that quiet flexibility, a deeper calm appears. A calm that does not depend on life being perfectly arranged. A calm that grows from allowing reality to unfold exactly as it does. And as this calm strengthens, the mind begins to recognize yet another hidden habit that often disturbs inner peace. As the mind slowly learns to allow uncertainty and disorder without panic, another quiet pattern begins to reveal itself. Even when people accept that life will not always be neat or predictable, a deeper habit often continues in the background. It is the tendency to negotiate with pain. When discomfort appears, whether emotional, physical, or psychological, the mind immediately begins searching for ways to escape it. It forms silent bargains, promising that things will be fine if the pain disappears quickly or if certain conditions change. Yet Buddhist teachings reveal something that many people only discover after years of struggle. Peace does not appear through bargaining with suffering. Peace begins when pain is allowed to exist without resistance. There is a very natural instinct inside every human being to move away from pain. When the body feels physical discomfort, the mind looks for ways to relieve it. When emotional pain appears, the mind reacts in a similar way. It begins searching for explanations, solutions, or distractions that might remove the feeling. This reaction seems sensible at first. After all, avoiding pain has helped humans survive for thousands of years. But emotional pain operates differently from physical danger. When the mind tries to escape it too quickly, it often becomes stronger. Instead of dissolving, the feeling becomes tangled in layers of resistance. One of the most common ways this happens is through emotional bargaining. The mind begins forming quiet agreements with life. It tells itself things like, if this problem goes away, then I will feel calm again. If that person apologizes, then the pain will stop. If I can just fix this situation, then everything will be fine. These thoughts appear innocent, but they carry a hidden message. They suggest that peace is only possible if pain disappears first. The mind begins waiting for the moment when discomfort will finally end. But during that waiting, suffering quietly grows, because pain has already arrived. The more the mind refuses to accept its presence, the more attention it gives to the struggle itself. Buddhist teachings often describe this situation as the difference between pain and suffering. Pain is a natural part of life. It appears when something meaningful is lost, when expectations collapse, or when circumstances become difficult. But suffering is created by the mind's attempt to push pain away. The mind begins repeating thoughts such as this should not be happening, or this feeling must stop immediately. Each repetition tightens the emotional tension. Instead of allowing pain to move through the mind like a passing storm, resistance traps it inside. Many people experience this during moments of grief. The loss of someone important creates a deep and natural sadness. But the mind often struggles to accept that sadness. It asks questions that have no immediate answers. Why did this happen now? Why did it happen this way? What could have been done differently? These questions often reflect the mind's attempt to negotiate with reality. If the right explanation appears, perhaps the pain will disappear. But grief does not operate through logical solutions. It moves through emotional processes that require time and acceptance. When the mind allows grief to exist without trying to remove it immediately, something surprising happens. The emotion begins to move naturally. Sadness rises and falls like waves rather than remaining frozen. But when the mind resists the feeling, it remains trapped in place. Another common example appears in moments of personal disappointment. A goal may collapse after years of effort. The mind quickly begins negotiating with the situation. It says perhaps things will change tomorrow, or maybe someone will recognize the effort and restore the opportunity. Hope can be useful in many situations, but bargaining with pain often keeps the mind stuck between acceptance and denial. The person cannot move forward because part of the mind is still waiting for reality to reverse itself. This waiting prolongs the emotional struggle. Buddhist wisdom encourages a different response. It suggests meeting pain with honest awareness rather than negotiation. Instead of asking how quickly the feeling can disappear, the mind simply observes the experience itself. What does the emotion feel like? Where is it present in the body? Is it changing moment by moment? This observation may sound simple, but it changes the relationship between the mind and the feeling. The mind stops treating pain as an enemy that must be defeated. Instead, it treats pain as a temporary experience that can be understood. When this shift happens, the emotional pressure often begins to soften. The mind no longer spends energy trying to escape the feeling. It simply allows the experience to unfold. Over time, this approach creates emotional resilience. A resilient mind does not collapse when pain appears. It recognizes that discomfort is part of the human experience. Just as the body heals after physical injury, the emotional system also moves through natural cycles of recovery. But that recovery requires space. Resistance blocks that space, and acceptance creates it. Another insight begins to emerge through this practice. Much of the fear surrounding emotional pain comes from the belief that the feeling will last forever. The mind tells itself that sadness or anxiety will never end. This belief increases the urge to negotiate with the feeling. But when someone observes emotions carefully, they begin to see something different. Feelings constantly change. Even intense emotions rise and fall over time. They may return in waves, but they rarely remain fixed at the same intensity. This observation weakens the mind's urgency to escape them immediately. The person begins to trust that emotions can be experienced without destroying their sense of stability. Buddhist meditation practices often train the mind to sit with uncomfortable emotions without reacting impulsively. During these practices, attention remains on the breath or on the sensations in the body, while emotions appear and fade naturally. This training teaches the mind that pain can exist without needing immediate solutions. It also reveals something else that is deeply important. Pain often carries information. Sadness may reflect the value of something that was lost. Fear may reveal a sense of vulnerability. Anger may indicate that a boundary has been crossed. When the mind rushes to escape these feelings, it often misses the understanding they contain. But when the mind allows the emotions to exist, their meaning becomes clearer. This clarity transforms the experience of pain. The feeling is no longer seen as an obstacle to be eliminated. Instead, it becomes part of the human experience that can deepen wisdom and compassion. Another shift occurs when people stop bargaining with pain. They begin to realize that peace does not require the complete absence of discomfort. Peace can exist alongside difficult emotions. A calm mind may still experience sadness, uncertainty, or loss, but it no longer feels overwhelmed by the need to eliminate those feelings instantly. This balance creates a deeper form of emotional stability. Instead of chasing constant happiness, the mind becomes capable of holding both pleasant and unpleasant experiences with equal awareness. This ability reflects one of the central teachings of Buddhism, equanimity. Equanimity does not mean indifference. It means maintaining inner balance even while emotions move through the mind. When equanimity grows, emotional bargaining begins to disappear. The mind no longer says, "I will only feel calm when this pain is gone." Instead, it understands that calm can exist even while pain is present. This understanding transforms the experience of difficult moments. The person no longer feels trapped in an endless negotiation with life. They allow reality to unfold, including the emotions that arise from it. This acceptance does not remove pain completely, but it removes the extra suffering created by resistance. Over time, the mind begins to trust its own capacity to experience emotions without being destroyed by them. This trust reduces fear, and when fear fades, the urge to negotiate with pain fades as well. The mind becomes quieter. Emotions move through it like weather patterns passing across the sky. Some storms may be intense, but none of them last forever. In that quiet understanding, peace begins to grow, not because life has become painless, but because the mind has stopped demanding that pain must disappear before calm can exist. And as this realization deepens, another layer of acceptance slowly begins to reveal itself within the mind. As the mind gradually learns to stop bargaining with pain, a quieter realization begins to surface. Even when someone accepts that discomfort cannot always be avoided, another habit often continues working in the background. The mind begins searching for explanations. It wants answers. It wants the final piece of information that will make everything make sense. It wants closure. Many people believe that peace will finally arrive when they understand exactly why something happened. Yet Buddhist wisdom reveals a difficult truth that becomes clearer with reflection. Not every chapter of life ends with an explanation, and the endless search for closure can quietly trap the mind in the past. A heavy feeling often appears when a situation ends without clear answers. A relationship may break apart suddenly without a satisfying explanation. A career opportunity may disappear without anyone explaining why. A friendship may slowly fade, leaving behind confusion instead of clarity. In moments like these, the mind begins searching for meaning. Questions begin repeating inside the mind. Why did this happen? What went wrong? Was there something that could have been done differently? What did the other person truly think? These questions seem natural. The human mind prefers stories that feel complete. When a situation ends abruptly or mysteriously, the mind feels uncomfortable with the unfinished narrative. It wants to fill in the missing pieces so the story can finally feel resolved. But life rarely provides perfect explanations. Sometimes the people involved in a situation do not fully understand their own decisions. Sometimes circumstances shift in ways that cannot be explained clearly. And sometimes events occur through a combination of causes that no single person can trace completely. When the mind insists on finding an explanation for every unresolved experience, it can become trapped in endless analysis. The mind begins replaying events repeatedly, examining conversations, interpreting small details, and imagining alternative outcomes. Hours may pass while the mind searches for meaning that may never appear. This process often creates the illusion that closure will arrive if the right answer is discovered. But even when explanations appear, they do not always bring peace. A person may learn why a relationship ended, yet the emotional pain remains. Someone may understand the reason behind a missed opportunity, but the disappointment still lingers. This reveals something important about the search for closure. Closure is often imagined as a moment when emotional discomfort disappears because the mind finally understands what happened. But emotional healing rarely follows such simple patterns. Understanding an event intellectually does not always resolve the emotional experience connected to it. Buddhist teachings encourage looking at this search for closure from another perspective. They suggest that the mind's desire for final explanations is often another form of resistance. Instead of accepting that an experience has ended without complete understanding, the mind tries to hold on to the situation until it feels resolved. This holding creates emotional stagnation. A person may continue thinking about a past event long after it has ended, not because the event is still active, but because the mind refuses to allow the story to remain unfinished. The result is a strange form of attachment. Instead of letting the experience move into memory, the mind keeps it alive through constant questioning. Each time the event is replayed, the emotional charge surrounding it becomes stronger. The person remains mentally connected to the situation even though it no longer exists in the present moment. Acceptance offers a different path. Acceptance does not mean pretending that questions do not exist. It simply means recognizing that some questions may never receive satisfying answers. When the mind acknowledges this possibility, something begins to loosen. The pressure to solve the mystery fades. The person no longer needs to analyze every detail of the past in order to move forward. This shift creates a surprising sense of freedom. Instead of carrying the unfinished story like a burden, the mind allows it to remain incomplete. The chapter ends without perfect explanation. Life continues. Buddhist philosophy often reminds people that impermanence shapes every aspect of existence. Experiences begin and end constantly. Some endings arrive gently and provide clarity. Others arrive suddenly and leave behind uncertainty. Expecting every ending to provide closure ignores the unpredictable nature of life. When the mind releases this expectation, the emotional struggle surrounding unresolved situations begins to soften. The person no longer feels obligated to solve every mystery from the past. They recognize that understanding may come gradually over time, or it may never appear at all. Either possibility becomes acceptable. This acceptance changes the way the mind interacts with memory. Instead of revisiting past experiences with the goal of extracting answers, the mind observes them with curiosity and compassion. The person may acknowledge that something painful occurred without needing to construct a final explanation. This approach does not erase the memory, but it removes the emotional urgency attached to it. The mind stops treating the event as a puzzle that must be solved before peace can exist. Peace becomes available even while the story remains unfinished. Another important shift occurs when someone accepts the possibility of unresolved endings. They begin to recognize that closure often grows from within rather than from external explanations. Instead of waiting for another person to provide clarity or apology, the individual reflects on what the experience revealed about their own values, boundaries, and desires. This reflection creates a form of personal understanding that does not depend on others. For example, a person who experienced betrayal may never fully understand the motivations behind another person's actions. But through reflection, they may learn something about their own need for honesty and trust. This realization provides meaning without requiring the other person to explain themselves. In this way, acceptance allows emotional movement to continue even when external answers remain absent. The mind begins focusing on growth rather than explanation. This perspective also encourages humility. Human understanding has limits. No one can fully comprehend every cause and condition that shapes an event. Recognizing this limitation reduces the pressure to explain every outcome. The mind becomes comfortable acknowledging uncertainty. This humility creates emotional flexibility. A flexible mind can move forward without needing every piece of information. It recognizes that life's complexity often exceeds the mind's ability to fully understand it. Instead of fighting this complexity, the mind begins to move with it. Another benefit appears when the search for closure loosens. Attention returns to the present moment. While the mind was focused on unresolved questions, much of life continued unfolding unnoticed. Conversations happened, opportunities appeared, small experiences offered moments of meaning and connection. but the mind remained occupied with the past. Acceptance releases that mental attachment. The present moment becomes visible again. New experiences receive attention instead of being overshadowed by old questions. This shift creates a sense of renewal. Life begins to feel open again rather than trapped in unfinished stories. The mind understands that moving forward does not require perfect closure. It simply requires the willingness to let the past remain incomplete. In this understanding, emotional energy returns. Instead of being consumed by endless analysis, the mind becomes available for new experiences, relationships, and insights. Healing begins quietly within this space, not through solving every unanswered question, but through accepting that some questions may remain unanswered. This acceptance does not weaken the mind, it strengthens it. It allows the individual to walk forward with clarity even while parts of the past remain mysterious. Life becomes less about solving every emotional puzzle and more about responding wisely to what unfolds next. Within that freedom, the mind discovers that peace does not depend on perfect explanations. Peace appears when the mind releases its demand that every story must end with understanding. And as this realization settles more deeply, another important lesson about acceptance begins to reveal itself. As the mind gradually learns to move forward without demanding closure, another subtle realization begins to appear. Even when a person accepts that some questions may never be answered, a powerful impulse still remains. It is the urge to repair what has already reached its end. The mind often believes that every broken situation must be fixed, every damaged relationship must be restored, and every painful event must somehow be corrected. Yet life contains moments when effort no longer changes the outcome. In those moments, the struggle to repair what cannot be repaired becomes its own form of suffering. This reveals another quiet truth that Buddhist teachings often emphasize. True acceptance requires courage because it asks the mind to recognize when action must give way to surrender. A difficult emotional tension appears when people encounter situations that cannot be reversed. The mind immediately begins searching for solutions. It asks what could still be done. It wonders if one more conversation, one more attempt, or one more effort might restore what has been lost. This instinct grows from the human desire to control outcomes. People want to believe that persistence can solve every problem. In many areas of life, persistence is valuable. Effort allows people to overcome obstacles, learn new skills, and improve difficult situations. But there are moments when effort no longer creates change. A relationship may end despite sincere attempts to repair it. A mistake may produce consequences that cannot be undone. A loved one may pass away despite every effort to hold on. When these moments arrive, the mind often refuses to accept the finality of the situation. It continues trying to repair what has already reached its natural conclusion. This effort can appear as constant reflection about what could have been done differently. The mind searches through past events repeatedly, looking for the precise moment when everything changed. It believes that if the right detail is discovered, the situation might somehow be corrected. But the past does not change through reflection alone. When the mind continues trying to fix something that has already ended, it becomes trapped between two realities. One reality is the present moment, where the situation has already unfolded. The other is the imagined version of the past, where a different outcome still seems possible. The emotional strain created by this conflict can be overwhelming. Buddhist teachings describe this situation as attachment to control. The mind holds tightly to the belief that effort should always produce a solution. When a problem refuses to respond to effort, the mind experiences deep frustration. But wisdom begins to grow when someone recognizes that control has limits. There are aspects of life that respond to action, and there are aspects that do not. Understanding the difference between these two situations requires careful attention and emotional maturity. The mind must learn to ask an important question. Is further effort creating change, or is it simply prolonging suffering? This question often feels uncomfortable because it challenges the belief that determination can solve every problem. But recognizing limits does not mean giving up on life. It means directing energy towards situations where effort can still create meaningful change. When someone accepts that certain situations cannot be fixed, a surprising form of strength appears. This strength is different from the strength used to overcome obstacles. It is the strength required to stop struggling. Stopping the struggle does not mean indifference. It means acknowledging reality clearly and allowing life to continue moving forward. This shift often requires deep emotional courage. For example, someone may remain attached to a relationship long after it has become clear that the connection cannot be restored. They may continue trying to repair the bond, believing that enough effort will eventually bring the other person back. But when the other person has already moved on emotionally, continued effort only prolongs pain. Recognizing this reality can feel heartbreaking, yet within that recognition lies the beginning of acceptance. The person understands that love alone cannot always restore what has already ended. Instead of continuing the struggle, they allow the relationship to become part of their past. Another situation may involve personal regret. A mistake may have caused harm that cannot be undone. The mind may replay the event repeatedly, wishing for an opportunity to return to the moment and act differently. But time does not move backward. When the mind continues trying to repair the past through regret, it traps itself in endless self-judgment. Acceptance offers another path. Instead of trying to erase the mistake, the person acknowledges it honestly. They learn from the experience and allow the lesson to shape future actions. This approach transforms regret into wisdom. The mistake remains part of the past, but it no longer controls the present. Buddhist philosophy often describes this understanding through the concept of right effort. Right effort means applying energy where it can create growth, while releasing attachment to situations that cannot be changed. This balance prevents exhaustion. A person who tries to control everything eventually becomes overwhelmed, but a person who understands the limits of control preserves their energy for meaningful action. The courage required for this balance grows slowly. At first, the mind may resist letting go of the desire to fix every situation. It may believe that surrender means weakness or failure, but surrender in the Buddhist sense is not passive resignation. It is a clear recognition that reality has already taken a particular form. Once that recognition appears, the mind can redirect its attention toward what still remains possible. Another important insight emerges from this practice. Many situations that cannot be fixed externally can still be transformed internally. A painful loss may never disappear, but the relationship to that loss can change. Grief may soften over time as compassion and understanding grow. A broken opportunity may never return, but new opportunities may appear when attention shifts toward the present moment. Acceptance opens the door to these transformations. When the mind stops trying to reverse reality, it becomes available for the possibilities that still exist. This shift creates emotional stability. Instead of feeling trapped by circumstances that cannot be altered, the person focuses on the aspects of life that remain within their influence. They nurture relationships that are still alive. They pursue goals that are still possible. They cultivate understanding that supports personal growth. Life continues moving forward. Another benefit appears when someone learns to stop fixing what cannot be fixed. Their relationship with control becomes healthier. Instead of believing that control must extend over every aspect of life, they recognize that life includes both effort and surrender. Effort shapes the future through wise action. Surrender allows peace with what has already happened. These two forces work together. Without effort, life becomes passive. Without surrender, life becomes a constant struggle. The balance between them creates resilience. Resilience allows the mind to remain steady even when events unfold beyond personal control. This steadiness is not cold or distant. It is grounded in understanding. The person accepts the reality of loss, change, and uncertainty without losing their capacity for compassion or hope. They continue engaging with life while recognizing that some outcomes cannot be forced. This awareness gradually transforms the emotional landscape of the mind. Situations that once felt like personal failures become part of the larger movement of life. Instead of resisting the flow of events, the person learns to move with it. Calm grows within that movement. Not because life has become easier, but because the struggle to control every outcome has ended. Within this calm, a deeper sense of wisdom begins to form. The mind learns that strength is not always measured by how much can be repaired. Sometimes strength is measured by the ability to release what cannot be changed. And as this understanding deepens, the mind becomes ready to explore another subtle moment in the experience of suffering. As the mind slowly learns the courage to stop fixing what cannot be fixed, another subtle realization begins to reveal itself. Letting go of control over certain outcomes brings a new kind of quiet inside the mind. Yet even after this surrender appears, a deeper process continues operating beneath the surface. Life still brings moments of pain. Loss, disappointment, confusion, and uncertainty still arise as natural parts of the human experience. But there is a particular moment that often goes unnoticed. It is the moment when simple pain quietly transforms into suffering. That transformation does not occur because of the event itself. It happens when the mind begins resisting what is already present. Buddhist teachings place great importance on noticing this moment because understanding it reveals the hidden doorway where suffering begins. There is a difference between pain and suffering that many people only begin to understand after careful reflection. Pain is an unavoidable part of living. It appears when the body becomes ill, when relationships change, when plans collapse, or when life introduces experiences that were never expected. These events create emotional or physical discomfort that arises naturally from being human. But suffering often begins after the initial pain has appeared. The mind reacts to the pain and begins to argue with it. This reaction is often subtle. A person may think, this should not be happening, or this cannot be real, or this must stop immediately. These thoughts may seem harmless, yet they create a powerful internal conflict. Reality presents a painful situation, and the mind refuses to allow it. At that moment, a second layer of distress begins forming. Pain was already present, but now resistance has been added to it. This is the moment where suffering quietly begins. Buddhist teachings often describe this transformation through simple observation. When discomfort appears, the mind has two possible responses. One response is to recognize the experience as part of the present moment. The other response is to reject it, pushing mentally against the situation as if the mind's protest might change reality. When the mind chooses rejection, the emotional weight of the experience multiplies. Instead of simply feeling sadness, the mind begins analyzing the sadness. It searches for explanations. It wonders how the situation could have been avoided. It imagines alternative realities where the event never occurred. Each of these mental reactions deepens the sense of distress. The original pain may have been temporary, but resistance extends its presence. This pattern becomes clear when someone pays attention to how their mind behaves during difficult moments. Consider a situation where disappointment arises. A person may receive news that a long-awaited opportunity has been lost. The initial feeling may be sadness or frustration. This is natural. But very quickly, the mind may begin adding thoughts that intensify the experience. It may say this is unfair, or this should not have happened after all the effort that was made. It may begin replaying events repeatedly, searching for mistakes or blaming external circumstances. These thoughts transform a single moment of disappointment into hours or days of emotional struggle. The mind has moved beyond experiencing the pain. It has begun fighting it. This fight creates suffering. Buddhist philosophy emphasizes that suffering grows not from events themselves, but from the mind's relationship with those events. When the mind resists reality, it generates tension. That tension fuels emotional distress. This process can be observed even in small, everyday experiences. A person may encounter an inconvenience, such as being delayed in traffic. The situation itself may be neutral or mildly frustrating, but the mind may react strongly, thinking this delay should not exist, or that the situation is ruining the entire day. The body begins to tighten, the mind grows restless. The delay becomes far more stressful than it needed to be. In this example, the suffering does not come from the traffic itself. It comes from the mind's refusal to accept the present moment. When acceptance replaces resistance, the emotional experience changes dramatically. The person still recognizes the delay, but the internal struggle disappears. The mind acknowledges that the situation exists and then turns its attention toward the next possible action, or simply remains present with the moment. This shift reduces tension. Another example appears in moments of emotional vulnerability. A person may experience sadness after a meaningful loss. The sadness itself may come in waves, appearing and fading naturally over time. But the mind may resist the feeling, believing that sadness represents weakness or that it should disappear quickly. The person may try to distract themselves constantly or suppress the emotion entirely. This suppression often causes the feeling to remain unresolved. The sadness does not disappear, it becomes buried beneath layers of resistance. Over time, suppressed emotions can reappear in unexpected ways, sometimes as anxiety, irritability, or exhaustion. Acceptance changes this process. When the mind allows sadness to exist without labeling it as a problem that must be eliminated immediately, the emotional experience begins to move naturally. The feeling rises, expresses itself, and gradually fades. This movement prevents suffering from becoming prolonged. The key insight here is awareness. Suffering begins the moment the mind refuses to allow the present experience to exist. But most people do not notice the exact moment when resistance begins. The mind reacts automatically. Thoughts appear quickly, often before conscious awareness recognizes them. This is why Buddhist practice often focuses on mindfulness. Mindfulness trains the mind to observe thoughts and emotions as they arise. Instead of immediately reacting, the person becomes aware of the mental process itself. They notice the moment when the mind says this should not be happening. That recognition creates space. Within that space, the person can choose not to follow the thought. They observe the pain without adding resistance. This simple shift interrupts the cycle of suffering. The pain remains present, but it no longer grows into prolonged distress. Another important observation emerges through this practice. Resistance often comes from the belief that unpleasant experiences threaten personal identity. A person may feel embarrassed after making a mistake. The mind may react strongly because it believes the mistake reflects negatively on who they are. Instead of simply acknowledging the error, the mind resists the situation, creating feelings of shame and self-criticism. But when identity becomes less rigid, the mind becomes more flexible. The person recognizes that mistakes are part of learning rather than permanent reflections of personal worth. This understanding reduces resistance. Without resistance, the emotional impact of the mistake becomes easier to process. The experience remains valuable, but it no longer creates unnecessary suffering. Buddhist teachings encourage observing the flow of experiences, without clinging to them or rejecting them. This balanced awareness allows emotions to appear and disappear naturally. The mind does not grasp pleasant experiences desperately, nor does it push unpleasant ones away. It simply witnesses them. Witnessing creates calm. When the mind observes an emotion without reacting, the emotional intensity often decreases on its own. This does not mean that painful experiences disappear instantly. It means they are no longer amplified by resistance. The mind remains steady even while emotions move through it. Over time, this steadiness becomes stronger. The person begins to recognize that suffering is not an unavoidable consequence of pain. It is the result of the mind's struggle against reality. Once this insight becomes clear, the mind becomes less reactive. When a difficult situation appears, the person notices the initial pain but remains aware of the temptation to resist it. Instead of engaging in that resistance, they allow the experience to unfold. This practice creates emotional freedom. The mind no longer feels trapped in cycles of reaction and resistance. It experiences life more directly. Moments of discomfort still arise, but they pass more quickly because the mind does not prolong them through mental conflict. This understanding also deepens compassion. When someone sees how resistance creates suffering within their own mind, they begin to recognize the same pattern in others. They realize that many people carry emotional pain, not because life has treated them unfairly, but because their minds are struggling against experiences that have already occurred. This recognition softens judgment. Instead of criticizing others for their reactions, the person understands how natural the struggle against pain can be. Compassion grows naturally from this understanding. At the same time, awareness becomes a guide. The mind learns to observe itself carefully. When resistance begins to appear, it is recognized early. The person notices the thought that says, "This should not be happening." They recognize that this thought leads towards suffering. Instead of following it, they return their attention to the present moment. Breathing continues. The body relaxes. The experience unfolds without unnecessary struggle. In this quiet awareness, pain remains part of life, but suffering loses its power. And as the mind becomes more familiar with this transformation, another important truth about the nature of control begins to emerge. As the mind begins to recognize the moment when resistance quietly turns pain into suffering, another deeper pattern slowly comes into view. The struggle against reality often hides a powerful belief underneath it. The mind assumes that life should be controllable. It assumes that with enough planning, effort, and intelligence, circumstances can be arranged exactly the way they are desired. When reality refuses to cooperate with this belief, anxiety begins to grow. The mind tries harder. It tightens its grip on situations, people, and outcomes. Yet Buddhist teachings gently reveal something that can feel both unsettling and liberating at the same time. Much of the control the mind believes it has is only an illusion. A quiet tension often appears in daily life when the mind tries to organize the world according to its expectations. Plans are made carefully. Conversations are rehearsed mentally. Decisions are calculated with the hope that each action will produce a predictable result. These behaviors can be useful when applied to practical tasks. Planning a journey or organizing work responsibilities requires some degree of structure. But the mind often extends this desire for structure far beyond what reality can provide. It begins trying to control outcomes that depend on countless factors outside personal influence. A person may try to control how others feel about them. They may try to control how quickly success arrives. They may try to control the exact timing of events that are shaped by complex circumstances. The moment these efforts fail, anxiety begins to appear. The mind feels responsible for managing situations that were never truly within its control. This is where the illusion begins to show itself. Control feels comforting because it creates the impression that life can be shaped exactly as desired. The mind imagines that if the right choices are made, uncertainty will disappear. But reality rarely follows such simple patterns. Consider how many aspects of life unfold beyond individual influence. The weather changes without consulting human plans. Economic conditions shift unexpectedly. Other people make decisions based on thoughts and emotions that cannot be fully predicted. Even within the body, many processes operate independently of conscious control. The heart beats, cells regenerate, and countless biological systems maintain balance without deliberate effort. Yet the mind continues believing it should manage everything. This belief creates a constant background of tension. The mind becomes preoccupied with preventing problems before they occur. It tries to anticipate every possible difficulty. It monitors situations carefully, hoping to maintain control over outcomes. But this vigilance rarely produces peace. Instead, it generates exhaustion. Buddhist philosophy describes this situation as attachment to control. The mind clings to the belief that security can be created by organizing the world perfectly, but life remains unpredictable. When reality moves in unexpected directions, the mind interprets the change as failure rather than as a natural part of existence. This interpretation increases anxiety. For example, a person may plan a future carefully, believing that each step will lead to a specific result. When circumstances shift unexpectedly, the mind feels destabilized. It begins questioning decisions, worrying about the future, and searching for ways to regain control. But often the situation simply reflects the natural complexity of life rather than a mistake in planning. Recognizing this complexity brings a surprising sense of freedom. When the mind accepts that many outcomes cannot be controlled completely, it stops carrying the burden of managing the entire world. This does not mean abandoning responsibility. It means focusing attention on the areas where influence truly exists. There are aspects of life that can be guided through effort and intention. A person can choose how they speak, how they respond to challenges, and how they treat others. They can cultivate patience, compassion, and understanding. These choices represent genuine forms of influence, but the outcomes of these actions often depend on factors beyond individual control. Understanding this difference transforms the way the mind approaches life. Instead of trying to control everything, the person begins concentrating on actions rather than outcomes. This approach reduces anxiety because it removes the pressure to guarantee results. The person acts wisely and allows events to unfold. Another important insight emerges from this perspective. Much of the mind's attempt to control others arises from fear. A person may try to shape someone else's behavior because they fear rejection or conflict. They may attempt to guide another person's choices because they worry about potential consequences. But other people possess their own thoughts, desires, and experiences. Trying to control them often creates frustration rather than harmony. When the illusion of control fades, relationships become healthier. Instead of manipulating or persuading others constantly, the person communicates honestly and allows the other individual to make their own decisions. This respect for autonomy reduces tension. It also encourages genuine connection. Another place where the illusion of control becomes visible is in the mind's relationship with the future. Many people spend large portions of their lives worrying about events that have not yet occurred. They imagine potential problems and attempt to solve them mentally before they appear. But the future contains countless possibilities that cannot be predicted accurately. The mind's attempt to control future events through worry rarely produces useful solutions. Instead, it often creates unnecessary anxiety. Buddhist teachings encourage returning attention to the present moment. The present moment is the only place where meaningful action can occur. By focusing on what can be done now, the mind becomes calmer. Energy that was previously spent worrying about the future becomes available for clear thinking and wise decisions. This shift does not remove uncertainty from life, but it changes the mind's relationship with uncertainty. Instead of viewing uncertainty as a threat, the person recognizes it as a natural feature of existence. Life unfolds through countless interactions between people, environments, and events. No single mind can control all of these influences. Recognizing this truth brings humility. Humility softens the need to dominate circumstances. It allows the mind to participate in life rather than trying to command it. This participation feels lighter. The person still plans and takes action, but they do so without the rigid expectation that every outcome must follow their design. This flexibility creates resilience. When plans change unexpectedly, the mind adapts rather than collapsing into frustration. Another benefit appears when the illusion of control dissolves. Gratitude becomes easier to experience. When someone believes they control every aspect of their success, they may overlook the countless factors that contributed to their achievements. But when they recognize the role of chance, timing, and support from others, appreciation grows. Life begins to feel less like a system that must be managed and more like a process that can be experienced with curiosity. Moments of joy become more visible. Small opportunities become meaningful. The mind becomes less preoccupied with controlling life and more attentive to participating in it. Buddhist teachings often emphasize the concept of letting go. Letting go does not mean withdrawing from life. It means releasing the need to force reality into a particular shape. When this release occurs, calm begins to appear naturally. The mind no longer feels responsible for guaranteeing perfect outcomes. It focuses instead on acting with awareness and integrity. This perspective transforms daily experiences. A conversation becomes an exchange rather than an attempt to control someone's opinion. A challenge becomes an opportunity for effort rather than a test of personal worth. An unexpected change becomes part of the unfolding of life rather than evidence that control has been lost. Over time, the mind becomes more relaxed. The constant tension created by trying to manage every outcome begins to fade. Peace grows in the space where control once dominated attention. This peace does not come from dominating the world. It comes from recognizing the limits of control and responding wisely within those limits. In this understanding, life becomes lighter. The mind continues to act, plan, and participate, but it does so with an awareness that the future cannot be forced. Events unfold through countless causes and conditions that no single person can fully command. Recognizing this truth frees the mind from constant anxiety. It replaces the illusion of control with the quiet confidence that comes from living in harmony with reality. And as the mind continues exploring this freedom, another important lesson about emotional experience begins to reveal itself. As the mind begins to release the illusion that everything must be controlled, another quiet discovery starts to appear. Even when a person understands that life cannot be perfectly managed, something inside still tries to shape the internal world. The mind does not only try to control events, it also tries to control emotions. Feelings are edited, suppressed, rearranged, and judged before they are fully experienced. Some emotions are welcomed, while others are treated as problems that must be removed immediately. But Buddhist teachings reveal something that can feel deeply liberating. Emotional freedom does not come from controlling feelings. It comes from allowing them to appear without interference. A quiet tension often exists inside the emotional life of many people. The moment a feeling appears, the mind reacts instantly. If the emotion is pleasant, the mind clings to it and hopes it will remain. If the emotion is uncomfortable, the mind begins trying to reshape it. Sadness appears, and the mind says this should not be here. Anger rises, and the mind says this feeling is wrong. Fear enters the body, and the mind immediately tries to push it away. In this way, emotions rarely get the chance to simply exist. Instead, they pass through a filter of judgment. People learn this habit early in life. Children are often taught that certain emotions are acceptable while others should be hidden. They may hear phrases like, "Do not cry," "Stop being angry," or "Do not be afraid." These messages are usually given with good intentions, but they quietly train the mind to believe that emotions must be controlled before they can be expressed. Over time, this belief becomes automatic. When a difficult emotion appears, the mind quickly begins editing it. The feeling is either suppressed or replaced with something that seems more acceptable, but emotions are not easily controlled in this way. When they are suppressed, they often remain inside the mind, waiting for another moment to surface. A person who avoids sadness may later experience unexplained heaviness. Someone who refuses to acknowledge anger may feel irritation appearing in unrelated situations. The emotional energy does not disappear, it simply changes its form. Buddhist wisdom approaches emotions differently. Instead of trying to control them, it encourages observing them. Observation creates space. Within that space, emotions can move naturally without becoming trapped by judgment. This approach does not mean acting impulsively on every feeling. It simply means allowing the emotion to exist without immediately labeling it as good or bad. When someone observes an emotion carefully, they begin to notice something important. Feelings are temporary. They arise, remain for a moment, and eventually fade. But when the mind tries to edit them, they often become more intense. The effort to suppress an emotion creates tension. That tension feeds the feeling, giving it more strength. For example, when a person feels anxious, the mind may react by criticizing the anxiety. It may say, "I should not feel this way," or "Something must be wrong with me." This reaction creates a second layer of distress. The person is no longer just experiencing anxiety. They are experiencing anxiety about their anxiety. The emotional burden becomes heavier. But if the mind simply observes the feeling without judgment, the experience changes. The person may notice the physical sensations associated with anxiety. The heartbeat may feel faster. The breath may become shallow. The body may feel restless. Instead of resisting these sensations, the mind allows them to be present. Gradually, the emotional intensity begins to soften. The feeling moves through the mind like a wave rather than remaining stuck. This process reveals an important truth. Emotions are not permanent states. They are movements within the mind and body. When allowed to move naturally, they rarely remain fixed for long. Another powerful change occurs when emotions are observed without editing. The mind becomes more honest with itself. Many people hide certain emotions because they believe those feelings reveal weakness. They may avoid admitting sadness because they want to appear strong. They may hide fear because they want to feel confident. But suppressing emotions does not eliminate them. It only creates distance between the person and their own experience. This distance makes emotional life confusing. A person may feel something but not fully understand it. They may react strongly without knowing why. Observation removes this confusion. When the mind acknowledges each emotion openly, clarity appears. The person begins to understand what they are truly feeling. This understanding creates emotional intelligence. Instead of reacting blindly to feelings, the person recognizes their patterns. They see how certain events trigger specific emotional responses. This awareness makes wise responses easier. For example, someone who observes their anger carefully may realize that the emotion often appears when they feel disrespected. Recognizing this pattern allows them to address the underlying issue calmly rather than reacting impulsively. Without observation, the anger might simply explode outward. With awareness, the person can respond thoughtfully. Another benefit of allowing emotions without editing them is compassion. When someone becomes familiar with their own emotional experiences, they begin to recognize the same struggles in others. They understand that everyone carries hidden feelings that are not always visible. This understanding softens judgment. Instead of criticizing others for emotional reactions, the person sees the common human experience beneath those reactions. Compassion grows naturally from this recognition. Buddhist teachings often describe emotions as visitors passing through the mind. Some visitors stay briefly, while others remain longer. But none of them are permanent residents. When the mind treats emotions as temporary guests rather than enemies or possessions, the emotional landscape becomes lighter. Feelings are welcomed, experienced, and allowed to depart naturally. Another transformation occurs in the relationship between emotions and identity. Many people believe that their emotions define who they are. If they feel angry, they believe they are an angry person. If they feel afraid, they believe they are weak. But observation reveals that emotions are experiences rather than identities. A person can feel sadness without being defined by sadness. They can experience fear without becoming fear itself. This distinction creates freedom. The mind no longer feels trapped by emotional labels. It recognizes that emotions are temporary movements within consciousness. This freedom reduces the fear of difficult feelings. When someone understands that emotions do not define them permanently, they become less afraid of experiencing them. They no longer need to suppress feelings in order to protect their sense of identity. Instead, they allow emotions to pass through naturally. This openness creates emotional resilience. Resilience does not mean avoiding emotions. It means remaining stable while emotions move through the mind. Another insight appears when emotions are allowed without editing. The mind begins to notice the subtle differences between reacting and observing. Reaction happens quickly and often without awareness. Observation slows the process. The person sees the emotion appearing and chooses how to respond. This pause creates wisdom. Instead of reacting impulsively, the person considers the situation carefully. They may still feel anger, sadness, or fear, but their actions become guided by understanding rather than by emotional intensity. Over time, this practice transforms emotional life. Feelings become sources of information rather than sources of chaos. The mind becomes a place where emotions can appear safely. This safety allows deeper honesty. People who allow their emotions fully often discover that the feelings they feared most were not as overwhelming as they once believed. The mind learns that it can survive emotional experiences without collapsing. This realization strengthens inner stability. Instead of trying to eliminate emotions, the person develops the capacity to hold them with awareness. In that awareness, calm begins to grow. Not because emotions disappear, but because the mind no longer fights them. The struggle against feelings fades. What remains is a quiet ability to experience life fully. Joy becomes richer because it is not clung to desperately. Sadness becomes gentler because it is not resisted. Anger becomes clearer because it is observed rather than suppressed. The emotional world becomes balanced. This balance does not remove all difficulties from life, but it transforms how those difficulties are experienced. Instead of being overwhelmed by emotions, the person moves through them with awareness. And as this emotional freedom deepens, the mind begins to discover another subtle source of conflict that often shapes human experience. As emotional freedom begins to grow through the simple act of allowing feelings to exist without editing them, another deeper pattern quietly reveals itself beneath many human struggles. Emotions do not only arise from events themselves. They often emerge because something inside feels threatened. That something is the image the mind carries about who it believes it is. Every person builds silent stories about themselves over time. These stories shape identity. They describe what kind of person someone believes they are, what they deserve, how others should treat them, and what their life should look like. But Buddhist teachings gently reveal that much of the conflict people experience with reality does not come from events alone. It comes from the way those events collide with the identity the mind is trying to protect. A subtle tension often appears when life refuses to follow the identity someone has built around themselves. The mind quietly holds certain expectations about who it should be in the world. A person may believe they are someone who is always respected, someone who always succeeds, someone who always remains strong, or someone who is always understood by others. These beliefs may not be spoken aloud, but they live quietly beneath everyday thoughts. When reality confirms these identities, the mind feels comfortable, confidence grows, the person feels stable within the image they have created. But when events contradict that image, discomfort begins to appear. Someone who sees themselves as competent may feel shaken when they make a mistake. A person who believes they are always kind may feel confused when anger rises inside them. Someone who believes they deserve appreciation may feel deeply hurt when their efforts go unnoticed. The event itself may be simple, but the emotional reaction becomes strong because the identity attached to the event feels threatened. Buddhist philosophy explores this dynamic with great clarity. It teaches that the sense of self many people defend so carefully is not as solid as it appears. Identity is often built from memories, social roles, achievements, and expectations learned throughout life. These elements combine to form a picture of who someone believes they are. But this picture is constantly changing. The person who once saw themselves as a student later becomes a professional. Someone who identified strongly with success may later face failure and discover new aspects of themselves. Identity evolves as life unfolds. Yet the mind often tries to freeze identity into a fixed shape. It becomes attached to the story it has created. This attachment creates conflict when reality moves in a different direction. For example, a person may identify strongly with being independent. They may take pride in solving problems alone and rarely asking for help. This identity can feel empowering for many years, but eventually life may present situations that require support from others. Illness, emotional difficulty, or unexpected challenges may make independence difficult to maintain. At that moment, the person may struggle not only with the situation itself, but with the identity that feels threatened. Accepting help may feel like losing part of who they believe they are. The conflict does not arise from the need for help alone. It arises from the attachment to the identity of independence. When identity becomes flexible, this struggle disappears. The person can still value independence while recognizing that accepting support at certain moments is natural. The identity becomes less rigid. This flexibility allows the mind to adapt to changing circumstances. Another example appears in social roles. People often define themselves through their relationships or achievements. Someone may strongly identify with their career. Their sense of worth may become closely connected to their professional success. When their career progresses smoothly, their identity feels stable. But if the job changes, if a promotion is missed, or if the career path shifts unexpectedly, the person may feel lost. The emotional pain can feel overwhelming because it seems as if their identity has been damaged. Buddhist teachings suggest looking deeper into this experience. They encourage observing how identity forms in the mind. When someone examines their thoughts carefully, they may notice that identity is built from many small stories. These stories describe what kind of person they believe they should be. Some stories are created through praise from others. Some come from cultural expectations, others form through personal ambitions. But none of these stories remain fixed forever. Life continuously reshapes them. When the mind recognizes this fluid nature of identity, it becomes less attached to defending a specific image. Instead of protecting a rigid self-image, the person begins responding to life more openly. This openness creates acceptance. Another important insight appears when identity becomes less rigid. Emotional reactions begin to soften. Many strong emotional responses occur because the mind interprets events as personal threats. If someone receives criticism, they may feel deeply hurt because the criticism challenges the identity they hold about themselves. But when identity is viewed more lightly, criticism becomes information rather than an attack on the self. The person can listen, reflect, and learn without feeling that their entire identity is being questioned. This shift reduces defensiveness. It allows growth to happen more easily. Another common identity struggle appears in expectations about life direction. A person may imagine a very specific future for themselves. They may believe their life should follow a particular path. When events disrupt that path, disappointment arises. But often the disappointment comes not only from the change itself, but from the identity attached to the original plan. The person believed they were someone who would follow that particular journey. When life moves differently, the identity must adjust. If the mind resists this adjustment, suffering grows. But when identity becomes more flexible, new possibilities appear. The person discovers that their sense of self can evolve alongside life's changes. They are not limited to a single story about who they are. Buddhist philosophy introduces the concept of non-self to describe this insight. Non-self does not mean that individuals do not exist. It means that the identity people cling to is not permanent or independent. The self is a dynamic process shaped by experiences, thoughts, and conditions. Understanding this idea can feel uncomfortable at first. Many people rely on identity for stability, but when the mind becomes less attached to fixed self-images, it discovers a deeper form of stability. This stability does not depend on maintaining a specific identity. It comes from awareness itself. The person becomes comfortable with change. They recognize that life will continuously reshape circumstances, roles, and experiences. Instead of resisting these changes, they move with them. This movement creates calm. Identity becomes a flexible tool rather than a rigid structure. The person can step into different roles as life unfolds without feeling that their true self is being threatened. Another benefit of loosening identity appears in relationships. Conflicts between people often arise because both individuals are defending their identities. One person may believe they must always be right. Another may feel that admitting a mistake would damage their self-image. These attachments turn simple disagreements into prolonged conflicts. But when identity becomes lighter, communication improves. A person can admit uncertainty without feeling weakened. They can acknowledge mistakes without feeling ashamed. This honesty strengthens relationships. It replaces defensiveness with openness. The same principle applies to personal growth. When someone is strongly attached to an identity, learning can become difficult. A person who believes they are always knowledgeable may resist new ideas that challenge their understanding. But when identity becomes flexible, curiosity increases. The person becomes willing to explore different perspectives. They no longer feel the need to protect an image of themselves as someone who already knows everything. Curiosity replaces defensiveness. Learning becomes easier. Gradually, the mind realizes that identity was never meant to be a fixed object. It is a collection of temporary patterns shaped by experiences. Recognizing this truth reduces suffering because the mind no longer fights to protect a rigid self-image. Instead, it allows identity to evolve naturally. This evolution brings a deeper sense of freedom. The person can experience life without constantly measuring whether events confirm or threaten their identity. They become less concerned with maintaining a specific image and more interested in understanding reality as it unfolds. And as this understanding deepens, another quiet transformation begins to appear in the way the mind relates to time and change. As the mind begins loosening its attachment to rigid identity, something subtle but powerful begins to change within the inner landscape. When the self-image becomes lighter, many of the conflicts that once felt deeply personal start to lose their intensity. Events no longer feel like direct threats to who someone believes they are. Yet, even after this shift begins, another quiet habit still remains active beneath the surface. The mind continues holding conversations with reality. It debates with events that have already occurred. It questions outcomes that can no longer be changed. It repeats certain thoughts over and over, as if arguing with the past might somehow alter what has already unfolded. Buddhist teachings describe this habit as one of the hidden sources of mental exhaustion, and understanding it reveals a surprising form of relief. A quiet but constant debate often runs through the mind without being noticed clearly. It appears in thoughts that begin with simple phrases. This should not have happened. That person should have acted differently. Things were supposed to go another way. These thoughts seem ordinary because they appear so frequently, yet each one represents a form of resistance to reality. The mind is not simply remembering what happened, it is arguing with it. When a person replays a difficult event in their thoughts, the mind often tries to rewrite the moment. It imagines alternative outcomes. It creates scenarios where different choices were made or where circumstances behaved differently. At first, this may seem like reflection, but often it becomes something else. It becomes a silent argument with reality itself. This argument rarely produces useful insight. Instead, it drains emotional energy. The mind becomes trapped inside the same conversation repeatedly. Every time the thought returns, the emotional response also returns. The event may have happened once in the external world, but inside the mind it continues happening again and again. This repetition is what keeps emotional wounds active long after the original moment has passed. Buddhist wisdom recognizes that the mind naturally tries to make sense of experience. It searches for meaning, patterns, and explanations. This process can be helpful when it leads to understanding. But when the mind becomes locked in debate with reality, it stops searching for understanding and begins defending its expectations. It insists that events should have followed a different path. But reality has already moved forward. The argument becomes impossible to win, yet the mind continues repeating it. This is why acceptance creates such profound relief. Acceptance does not mean approving of everything that happens. It does not require believing that painful events are good or deserved. Acceptance simply means acknowledging that something has occurred. It replaces the phrase "this should not have happened" with something much quieter. This happened. When this simple recognition appears, the inner debate begins to dissolve. The mind no longer spends energy arguing with an unchangeable moment. Instead, that energy becomes available again. It returns to awareness, presence, and clarity. Many people notice this shift most clearly when they reflect on past regrets. A mistake may have been made years earlier. Perhaps a decision led to consequences that still feel painful to remember. The mind may replay that decision countless times, asking why it happened or imagining how life would be different if another choice had been made. But the more the mind debates with the past, the heavier the regret becomes. The memory does not change, only the suffering grows. When acceptance enters the picture, something remarkable occurs. The person recognizes that the event is part of their history. The mistake remains part of their story, but the argument with it ends. The mind may still remember the lesson, but it no longer relives the conflict. The emotional charge begins to soften. This same pattern appears in relationships. Someone may feel hurt by words that were spoken during a difficult conversation. Long after the conversation has ended, the mind may continue replaying those words. It may imagine responding differently or defending itself more clearly. Each time the memory returns, the emotional reaction also returns. The mind remains in debate with the moment. But when acceptance arrives, the person recognizes that the words were spoken and cannot be taken back. This recognition does not erase the pain immediately, but it stops feeding the pain with repeated argument. Without that argument, the emotion gradually loses its intensity. Another place where inner debate appears is in the mind's expectations about life's fairness. People often carry beliefs about how life should unfold. Hard work should lead to success. Kindness should be rewarded. Loyalty should always be returned. These beliefs feel reasonable, but reality does not always follow these patterns. When events violate these expectations, the mind begins debating with reality. It asks why the world behaved differently from what was expected. But this debate rarely produces peace. Instead, it keeps the mind trapped in frustration. Acceptance interrupts this cycle. The person recognizes that reality does not always follow moral symmetry. Good actions do not always guarantee good outcomes. Unfair events still occur. Acknowledging this truth may feel difficult at first, but it also brings freedom. The mind stops demanding that reality obey its expectations. Without that demand, emotional energy begins returning. The person can focus on how to respond rather than on arguing with what already exists. Another powerful transformation appears when the inner debate quiets. The mind becomes calmer. Much of mental exhaustion comes from constant internal conversation. Thoughts move rapidly from one argument to another. The mind tries to justify events, analyze them, or rewrite them. This continuous activity creates tension. When acceptance appears, the mental conversation slows down. The mind recognizes that some questions no longer require answers. Some events simply belong to the past. Some situations exist exactly as they are. This realization reduces mental noise. The mind becomes quieter. In that quietness, awareness grows stronger. A person begins noticing small details that were previously hidden beneath constant thinking. The rhythm of breathing becomes clearer. The body relaxes. The present moment becomes more vivid. This shift may seem simple, but it represents a profound change in the relationship between thought and reality. Instead of debating with life, the mind begins observing it. Observation requires less energy than argument. It allows experiences to unfold without constant interference. Over time, this quiet observation becomes a habit. The mind learns that not every thought needs to be followed. Some thoughts are simply echoes of old expectations. When these thoughts appear, the person recognizes them and allows them to pass. They do not become trapped inside the argument. This ability to release thoughts gently strengthens emotional stability. When a difficult event occurs, the mind may still react initially, but the person notices the beginning of the internal debate. They recognize the thought saying, "This should not have happened." Instead of continuing the argument, they pause. They allow the event to exist as part of reality. That pause interrupts the cycle of suffering. The emotional intensity begins to settle. Another important insight emerges through this practice. The mind often believes that continuing the debate will eventually produce closure. It thinks that if the situation is analyzed long enough, the right explanation will appear. But many experiences do not provide clear answers. Life contains uncertainty, complexity, and unpredictability. When the mind accepts that some questions may remain unresolved, the pressure to solve every mystery disappears. This acceptance creates peace. The person becomes comfortable with not knowing everything. The mind no longer feels responsible for explaining every detail of life. Instead, it focuses on responding wisely to what is happening now. Gradually, the person begins experiencing a quiet relief that feels almost unfamiliar. The mind is no longer working constantly to correct reality. It is no longer fighting moments that have already passed. The debate has ended. In its place, a calmer awareness begins to grow. Life continues unfolding with its natural mix of joy and difficulty. But the mind now meets these experiences without the exhausting habit of argument. And as this quiet relief deepens, another gentle realization begins to appear about the nature of change itself. As the inner debate with reality begins to quiet, the mind slowly discovers how much energy was once spent arguing with moments that had already passed. That silence creates space. In that space, something else becomes easier to notice. Many of the struggles that once felt like battles with reality were not always about reality itself. They were about the stories the mind quietly created around events. The mind rarely experiences life as it is. Instead, it interprets each moment through personal meaning, expectations, memories, and beliefs. Buddhist teachings gently point toward this hidden habit. They show that suffering often grows not from events themselves, but from the narratives the mind builds around them. A strange pattern exists in the way people experience their lives. When something happens, the event itself is usually simple and brief. A conversation ends abruptly. A message is not answered. A plan does not unfold the way it was expected. The event may last only a few seconds or minutes, but the mind rarely leaves the event alone. It begins constructing a story. This story attempts to explain why the event occurred. It interprets intentions, predicts consequences, and assigns meaning to what happened. The mind may say that the person who did not respond must be upset, or that the missed opportunity means something has gone terribly wrong, or that the unexpected change signals failure. The event remains the same, but the story surrounding it grows larger and more complex. Soon the person is no longer reacting to the event itself. They are reacting to the story they have created. Buddhist philosophy often highlights the importance of recognizing this difference. There is the raw experience of life, and then there is the interpretation the mind places upon that experience. These two things are not the same, yet most people blend them together so quickly that they cannot tell where the event ends and the story begins. For example, someone might receive a brief message that seems distant or formal. The event itself is simple. A few words appeared on a screen, but the mind begins building a narrative around those words. It may assume the other person is angry. It may interpret the tone as rejection. It may imagine that the relationship is changing or that something has gone wrong. None of these conclusions are part of the original event. They are additions created by the mind. When the story grows strong enough, it begins shaping emotional experience. The person may feel hurt, anxious, or defensive, even though the actual event did not contain those meanings. This habit appears in many areas of life. A person may experience a moment of failure and quickly tell themselves a story about what that failure means. The mind may decide that the event proves they are incapable, unlucky, or destined for disappointment. But the event itself may simply represent one unsuccessful attempt. The story gives it much greater significance. Another person might experience a moment of praise and create a different kind of story. They may interpret the praise as proof that their value depends on always performing well. This story may feel positive at first, but it can later create pressure and fear of losing approval. In both cases, the mind has transformed a simple moment into a narrative about identity and future outcomes. Buddhist teachings encourage observing this storytelling process carefully. When someone begins paying attention to their thoughts, they may notice how quickly narratives appear. The mind seems to prefer explanation. It feels uncomfortable with uncertainty, so it fills gaps in understanding with assumptions. But these assumptions are often shaped by past experiences rather than by the present moment. Someone who has experienced rejection in the past may quickly interpret neutral situations as signs of rejection again. Someone who has struggled with self-doubt may interpret challenges as evidence of personal failure. These patterns reveal how personal history influences the stories the mind creates. Recognizing this influence helps people see that their interpretation of events is not always objective. It is filtered through memory and expectation. This awareness creates a powerful shift. Instead of automatically believing every story the mind produces, the person begins questioning it. They ask whether the narrative truly reflects reality or whether it is simply one possible interpretation among many. This questioning reduces emotional intensity. When the mind realizes that its story may not be the only explanation, it becomes less attached to that interpretation. Another important insight appears when someone observes how narratives grow over time. A single event may inspire dozens of thoughts. Each thought may add another layer to the story. Soon the narrative becomes so elaborate that it feels completely real. The person may become emotionally invested in defending the story they have created. But if they pause and return to the original event, they may notice how simple it actually was. The story contained far more detail than the event itself. This realization often brings relief. It reminds the mind that not every interpretation deserves full belief. Some stories are simply mental constructions. Buddhist teachings often describe the mind as a storyteller. This description does not criticize the mind. Storytelling is a natural part of human thinking. Stories help people organize experiences and communicate meaning. But problems arise when the mind forgets that its stories are interpretations rather than absolute truths. When someone believes every narrative without question, they become trapped inside their own explanations. Events become heavier than they need to be. The mind reacts not only to reality but to the imagined meanings layered on top of it. When this habit softens, life becomes simpler. The person learns to notice the difference between observation and interpretation. Observation focuses on what actually happened. Interpretation adds assumptions about why it happened and what it means. For example, a person may observe that someone did not return a call. That is the event. The mind might then interpret that silence as rejection, but it could also mean the other person was busy, distracted, or dealing with something unrelated. Recognizing this uncertainty helps the mind remain open. It prevents emotional reactions from becoming too intense too quickly. This openness creates space for patience. Instead of reacting immediately to a story, the person waits to see what reality reveals next. Another transformation appears when narratives become less rigid. The mind becomes more curious. Curiosity replaces certainty. Instead of assuming they understand every situation immediately, the person remains interested in discovering what is actually unfolding. This curiosity reduces conflict. It allows people to approach life with flexibility rather than defensiveness. Relationships benefit greatly from this change. Many misunderstandings between people arise because both individuals believe the stories they have created about each other. One person may assume that the other acted intentionally to cause harm, while the other person may have had a completely different motivation. When both sides become aware that their interpretations might not be complete, communication improves. They become willing to ask questions rather than making accusations. This shift builds trust. The same principle applies to personal challenges. When someone faces difficulty, the mind often creates a narrative about what the difficulty means. It may describe the situation as proof that life is unfair or that success is impossible. But when the person recognizes that this interpretation is a story rather than an absolute fact, new possibilities appear. The difficulty may become an opportunity for learning rather than a final judgment about the future. This perspective reduces despair. It allows the person to continue moving forward. Gradually, the mind begins to experience reality more directly. Events still happen, and thoughts still arise. But the person becomes less attached to the stories those thoughts create. They observe them with curiosity rather than immediately believing them. This awareness weakens the emotional grip of narratives. The mind becomes calmer because it is no longer carrying the weight of every interpretation it invents. Reality becomes lighter when it is experienced without layers of unnecessary storytelling, and as this clarity deepens, another quiet truth about the nature of expectation and disappointment begins to reveal itself. As the mind begins recognizing how easily it builds stories around events, a new layer of awareness starts to appear. Many of those stories were not created only to explain life, they were also created to escape discomfort. When something feels uneasy or painful, the mind immediately looks for ways to move away from the feeling. Sometimes it creates explanations, sometimes it searches for distractions, and sometimes it reacts quickly just to avoid sitting with the discomfort itself. Buddhist teachings slowly reveal that this habit of escape keeps the mind trapped in a cycle of restlessness. When discomfort is allowed to exist without immediate reaction, something surprising begins to happen. The feeling that once seemed unbearable often begins to lose its intensity on its own. A quiet fear often hides behind the human relationship with discomfort. Many people believe that if they allow unpleasant feelings to remain, those feelings will grow stronger or become permanent. Because of this belief, the mind quickly looks for ways to escape emotional tension. Distraction becomes the most common response. A person may reach for their phone the moment boredom appears. They may start a new activity when sadness arises. They may fill silence with constant noise so that uncomfortable thoughts cannot be heard clearly. These behaviors are so common that they often feel natural, but beneath them lies a simple pattern. The mind is trying to run away from discomfort. This escape can take many forms. Some people distract themselves with constant activity. They keep their schedules full so that they never have to pause and face what they are feeling. Others escape through entertainment, scrolling endlessly through information that fills the mind but rarely nourishes it. Some people respond through immediate reaction. When anger appears, they speak quickly. When fear rises, they avoid the situation completely. Each of these responses shares the same purpose. They move attention away from the discomfort as quickly as possible. At first, this strategy may seem effective. The person experiences temporary relief, but the relief rarely lasts. The discomfort returns later, sometimes stronger than before. Buddhist practice approaches discomfort differently. Instead of escaping it, the teachings suggest observing it. Observation creates a powerful shift. When someone pauses and allows discomfort to exist without trying to eliminate it immediately, they begin discovering something important about the nature of feelings. Discomfort behaves like a wave. It rises, reaches a peak, and then gradually fades. But this natural movement is interrupted when the mind reacts strongly to the feeling. When someone resists discomfort, the mind becomes tense. That tension keeps the feeling active. For example, when anxiety appears, the body may experience tightness in the chest or restlessness in the muscles. If the mind reacts by saying this feeling must disappear immediately, the body becomes even more tense. The person begins worrying about the anxiety itself. This reaction feeds the original emotion. But if the person simply notices the sensation without fighting it, the experience begins changing. They observe the physical sensations carefully. They notice how the breath moves, how the body feels, and how the mind reacts. Instead of resisting the feeling, they allow it to unfold. Gradually, the emotional intensity begins softening. This process does not require forcing the feeling to disappear. It happens naturally when the mind stops resisting. Another important insight appears when someone sits with discomfort patiently. They realize that many feelings feel overwhelming only because they have never been experienced fully before. When emotions are avoided repeatedly, the mind becomes unfamiliar with them. The person may believe the feeling is too strong to handle simply because they have never allowed themselves to remain present with it. But when they finally sit with the emotion calmly, they discover that the experience is manageable. The mind learns that discomfort does not have to be feared. This learning builds confidence. Instead of reacting impulsively whenever discomfort appears, the person becomes curious about it. They observe how the feeling moves through the body and mind. This curiosity transforms the relationship with emotion. Discomfort becomes something to understand rather than something to escape. Buddhist meditation practices often focus on this simple act of sitting with experience. During meditation, thoughts and feelings appear naturally. Some of them are pleasant, while others may be uncomfortable. The practice is not to eliminate these experiences, but to observe them without interference. When someone practices this regularly, they become familiar with the rhythm of emotions. They see how quickly feelings change when they are not constantly resisted. This familiarity creates stability. The person becomes less reactive in everyday situations because they have learned that emotions do not control them. They are simply experiences passing through awareness. Another transformation occurs in the relationship with physical discomfort. Many people react strongly to small physical sensations. A slight ache, restlessness, or fatigue can trigger irritation. The mind immediately labels the sensation as a problem that must be fixed. But when someone practices sitting with physical sensations calmly, they begin noticing how those sensations shift. The body constantly changes. A sensation that feels intense at one moment may soften a few minutes later. Observation reveals this movement. The person learns that reacting immediately to every discomfort is not always necessary. Sometimes simply remaining present with the sensation allows it to change naturally. This insight also applies to emotional pain. Sadness, frustration, or loneliness may appear unexpectedly. The mind often tries to remove these feelings quickly. But when someone allows the emotion to exist without escape, they begin understanding it more deeply. They may notice the thoughts connected to the feeling. They may observe how the body responds. They may recognize patterns that have repeated throughout their life. This awareness transforms emotional pain into insight. The person learns from the experience rather than simply avoiding it. Over time, this practice builds resilience. Resilience does not mean eliminating discomfort from life. It means developing the ability to remain steady while discomfort exists. A resilient mind does not panic when difficult emotions appear. It recognizes them as temporary experiences. This steadiness reduces fear. When someone knows they can sit with discomfort without collapsing, they become less afraid of challenging situations. They approach life with greater courage. Another benefit appears when the habit of escape fades. The mind becomes quieter. Constant distraction creates mental noise. The person moves from one activity to another without fully experiencing any moment. But when someone allows discomfort to exist without immediately filling the space with distraction, the mind begins to settle. Moments of stillness appear. In that stillness, awareness deepens. The person becomes more connected to their inner experience. They notice thoughts and emotions more clearly. This clarity leads to wiser choices. Instead of reacting automatically, they respond thoughtfully. Life becomes less chaotic because the mind is no longer driven by constant avoidance. Even simple moments begin to feel richer. Silence no longer feels threatening. It becomes an opportunity for reflection. The person begins appreciating calm moments that were previously filled with distraction. This appreciation creates balance. Pleasant experiences become more meaningful, and difficult experiences become easier to navigate. Gradually, the person discovers that discomfort is not an enemy. It is part of the natural rhythm of life. When welcomed with patience, it often carries important information about personal needs, boundaries, or unresolved emotions. Listening to discomfort carefully allows the person to understand themselves more deeply. Instead of running from their inner world, they become familiar with it. This familiarity creates peace. The mind no longer fears every unpleasant sensation. It trusts its ability to remain present even when experiences are difficult. And as this trust grows stronger, another quiet understanding about patience and emotional endurance begins to unfold within the mind. As the mind becomes more familiar with sitting beside discomfort without rushing to escape it, another quiet realization begins to emerge. Many of the emotions that once felt overwhelming were not unbearable because of their intensity alone. They felt unbearable because the mind was constantly resisting them. When that resistance softens, something remarkable begins to happen. The moment becomes clearer, the experience becomes simpler, and within that simplicity, a powerful phrase begins to carry unexpected strength. When the mind finally stops arguing and quietly says, "This is what is," a deep sense of grounding begins to appear. A subtle shift takes place the moment reality is acknowledged without distortion. The mind no longer tries to reshape the moment. It no longer searches for alternative versions of what could have happened. It simply recognizes the situation as it stands. This recognition may appear ordinary, but it carries immense power. For many people, the mind spends enormous energy trying to avoid simple recognition of reality. When something painful occurs, the mind may drift toward denial. It may pretend the situation is not real yet. It may wait for circumstances to change quickly so that acknowledgement becomes unnecessary. But the longer recognition is delayed, the heavier the experience becomes. Reality continues existing whether the mind acknowledges it or not. And while the mind avoids recognition, it remains trapped in tension. The phrase, "this is what is," dissolves that tension. It brings the mind back to the present moment. Instead of struggling with what should have been, attention settles on what actually exists. This shift may feel uncomfortable at first because honest recognition removes the protective layer of illusion that the mind sometimes creates. But once that layer disappears, clarity arrives. Clarity does not eliminate difficulty, but it removes confusion. Without confusion, the mind becomes calmer. Buddhist teachings often describe this process as seeing things clearly. Clear seeing does not involve judgment. It does not add labels such as good or bad. It simply recognizes the truth of the moment. When someone practices this recognition, they begin noticing how much emotional energy was previously spent resisting reality. For example, when a relationship changes unexpectedly, the mind may spend weeks or months replaying conversations and imagining how events could have unfolded differently. Each thought tries to reshape the past. But when the mind finally acknowledges the present situation honestly, something begins to settle. The relationship has changed. The moment cannot be reversed. Once this truth is accepted, the internal struggle loses its fuel. Emotional energy begins returning to awareness rather than being consumed by resistance. Another example appears when a person faces a difficult personal challenge. Perhaps a plan has failed, or a path that once seemed certain has suddenly disappeared. The mind may search desperately for explanations or blame itself for what happened. But often the first step toward peace is not solving the entire problem. It is recognizing the present reality clearly. This is what is. The moment is acknowledged without distortion. This acknowledgement creates a foundation. From that foundation, thoughtful action becomes possible. Without recognition, the mind remains lost in confusion. Recognition brings stability. This stability does not remove all emotional pain, but it prevents pain from becoming chaos. The person understands where they stand. They see the situation as it truly exists, rather than as they wish it to be. Another powerful effect of honest recognition appears in the way it restores presence. When the mind argues with reality, it often becomes trapped in the past or future. it revisits old events or anticipates possible outcomes. But when someone says this is what is, attention returns to the present moment. The person becomes aware of their surroundings, their breath, and the sensations within their body. This awareness grounds the mind. The present moment becomes the place where life is experienced directly, rather than interpreted through endless thought. This grounding also reduces anxiety. Much anxiety comes from uncertainty about what might happen next. The mind tries to predict the future in order to feel safe. But these predictions often create fear rather than clarity. When the mind returns to the present and acknowledges reality honestly, it recognizes that the future has not yet arrived. Only the current moment exists. This recognition brings calm. Instead of fighting imagined possibilities, the person focuses on what can be done now. Another dimension of strength appears when honest recognition replaces denial. Denial may feel comforting temporarily because it protects the mind from painful truth, but denial also delays healing. When reality is avoided, the person remains disconnected from their experience. Healing begins when the truth is seen clearly. For example, someone may struggle with a difficult emotion they have been trying to ignore. They may avoid acknowledging sadness or disappointment because they fear the feeling will overwhelm them. But when they finally say, "This is what I am feeling," the emotion becomes easier to understand. Acknowledgement allows the feeling to move. Without acknowledgement, the emotion remains hidden and unresolved. Honest recognition, therefore, becomes an act of courage. It requires facing reality directly rather than escaping into distraction or denial. This courage strengthens the mind. Each time someone acknowledges a difficult truth, they build confidence in their ability to face life as it unfolds. This confidence reduces fear. The person learns that reality, even when painful, can be experienced without destroying inner stability. Another transformation occurs when recognition becomes a habit. The mind begins meeting situations with openness rather than resistance. Unexpected events still occur, but they are approached with curiosity instead of panic. The person asks what the situation requires rather than asking why it should not exist. This shift creates resilience. Resilient individuals do not avoid reality. They acknowledge it quickly and respond thoughtfully. Their strength comes from clarity. They understand that energy spent resisting the moment is energy that cannot be used to move forward. By accepting reality clearly, they free that energy. It becomes available for growth, adaptation, and meaningful action. Buddhist philosophy often emphasizes that acceptance is not passivity. It does not mean surrendering responsibility or refusing to act. Acceptance simply means recognizing the starting point. Action becomes effective only when it begins from truth. If someone refuses to acknowledge their circumstances honestly, their efforts will be misdirected. But when they see reality clearly, their actions align with what is truly possible. This alignment creates confidence. The person no longer feels lost in confusion. They understand the situation and respond wisely. Even when outcomes remain uncertain, they feel grounded because their response is based on clarity rather than denial. Over time, this practice reshapes the mind's relationship with difficulty. Instead of fearing challenging situations, the person approaches them with steady awareness. They recognize that every experience begins with the same simple step: seeing clearly, saying quietly, "This is what is." From this recognition, the mind becomes stable, emotions settle, thoughts become clearer, life continues unfolding, but the person meets each moment with honesty rather than resistance. And as this honesty deepens, another subtle understanding about patience and trust begins to emerge within the quiet spaces of awareness. As the mind learns the quiet strength of saying, "This is what is," another pattern slowly becomes easier to see. Honest recognition brings stability to the present moment, yet many people still feel pulled backward by memories that refuse to loosen their grip. Even after reality is acknowledged clearly, the mind sometimes returns again and again to events that have already ended. It replays them, analyzes them, and compares them to what life looks like now. In doing so, the mind remains divided between two places at once. One part of attention stands in the present moment, while another part continues living in what once was. Buddhist teachings gently reveal that peace cannot fully appear while the mind remains attached to the past, because the past is a place that no longer exists. A quiet pull toward the past is natural for the human mind. Memories are powerful. They hold images, emotions, and meanings that feel deeply personal. A joyful moment from years ago can still bring warmth to the heart. A painful experience can still create tension long after the event has ended. The mind often treats memories as if they still contain unfinished business. It returns to them repeatedly, trying to solve something that may never be solved. Sometimes the mind revisits the past to search for explanations. It asks why certain events happened or why particular people acted the way they did. It hopes that understanding the past completely will bring closure. But the past rarely provides complete explanations. Even when answers appear, they often do not erase the emotional weight attached to the memory. Other times, the mind returns to the past because it longs for moments that felt meaningful or joyful. A person may remember a time when life felt simpler or when a relationship brought happiness. The mind compares that memory with the present moment and quietly wishes things could return to the way they once were. This longing can create a subtle dissatisfaction with the present. The person feels that something important has been lost. Yet, the present moment continues moving forward. Life cannot return to the earlier version that memory preserves. This tension between memory and reality creates emotional conflict. Buddhist philosophy emphasizes the importance of recognizing impermanence. Everything that exists changes over time. Relationships evolve, circumstances shift, even the body itself moves through constant transformation. Memories often capture moments as if they were permanent snapshots, but those moments belonged to a particular time, a particular set of conditions that no longer exist. When the mind clings to these snapshots, it begins resisting the natural movement of life. Instead of allowing change, it tries to preserve something that has already passed. This resistance prevents peace from settling in the present moment. The mind remains focused on what used to be instead of noticing what exists now. Another way the past influences the present appears through regret. Regret often grows from the belief that something should have happened differently. The mind reviews old decisions and imagines alternative outcomes. It wonders what life would look like if another path had been taken. But this reflection can easily turn into self-criticism. The person may begin blaming themselves for choices made long ago. They may believe those choices permanently shaped their future, yet regret cannot rewrite the past. It can only deepen emotional suffering in the present. Acceptance offers a different perspective. Instead of trying to change what already happened, the person acknowledges the event as part of their history. They recognize that every moment of the past contributed to the person they have become today. Even mistakes contain lessons. When the mind accepts this truth, regret begins transforming into understanding. The past becomes a teacher rather than a prison. Another form of attachment to the past appears in unresolved emotional wounds. A painful experience may have left strong feelings of betrayal, grief, or disappointment. The mind may hold on to these emotions as a way of protecting itself from future harm. It believes that remembering the pain clearly will prevent the same situation from happening again. But holding on to emotional wounds often creates the opposite effect. The person continues reliving the pain internally. They remain connected to the experience long after the external situation has ended. Acceptance allows healing to begin. This does not mean forgetting what happened. It means recognizing that the event belongs to the past and does not need to control the present moment. the person acknowledges the experience, learns from it, and gradually releases the emotional grip it once held. This release restores emotional balance. Another important insight emerges when someone observes how memories function. Memories are not perfect recordings of events. They are shaped by perception, emotion, and interpretation. Two people may experience the same event, but remember it differently. Over time, memories may even change as the mind revisits them. Understanding this helps reduce the authority that memories often carry. The mind realizes that the past it clings to may not be as fixed or accurate as it once believed. This realization softens attachment. Instead of treating memories as absolute truths that must shape the present, the person sees them as reflections of earlier experiences. They remain meaningful, but they no longer dominate the present moment. Peace grows when attention returns to what is happening now. The present moment contains its own richness. The body breathes, the senses perceive, and life continues unfolding with new possibilities. But these possibilities remain hidden when the mind is occupied with past events. When someone releases their attachment to the past, the present becomes clearer. They notice small details that were previously overlooked. They appreciate conversations, sensations, and moments that once passed unnoticed. This awareness brings calm. The person no longer feels trapped between memory and reality. They stand fully within the moment they are living. Another benefit of releasing the past appears in relationships. When someone carries unresolved memories into new interactions, they may interpret present situations through the lens of earlier experiences. A person who was once hurt may become cautious or defensive, even when the current relationship is different. But when the past is accepted and released, the mind approaches new experiences with openness. The person responds to what is actually happening rather than reacting to echoes of earlier pain. This openness strengthens connection. It allows relationships to grow without being burdened by old patterns. Buddhist teachings often describe this practice as letting go. Letting go does not erase memories or deny their importance. It simply removes the emotional attachment that keeps the mind tied to them. The person still remembers their experiences, but they no longer carry them as weights. Instead, they carry them as wisdom. Over time, this practice transforms the way the mind experiences change. Change is no longer seen as something that steals the past. It becomes a natural movement of life. Each moment appears, unfolds, and passes. Clinging to earlier moments prevents the mind from fully experiencing the ones that arrive afterward. When someone releases that clinging, they begin to trust the unfolding of life again. They recognize that peace is not found by preserving the past. It is found by allowing life to continue moving forward. In that forward movement, the present moment becomes a place of renewal rather than comparison. And as the mind grows more comfortable with releasing the past, another subtle insight about the nature of change and transformation begins to reveal itself. As the mind slowly learns to loosen its grip on the past, something else begins to change quietly beneath the surface. When memories stop pulling attention backward, the present moment becomes clearer and more stable. Yet many people still carry another invisible burden that continues shaping their daily experience. Even when the past is no longer dominating attention, the body and mind often remain tense. Stress has become such a familiar companion that many people believe it is simply part of living. But Buddhist teachings reveal something deeper about this tension. Much of what people call stress does not come directly from life itself. It grows from the mind's resistance to what is happening. When that resistance softens, the relationship between the mind, the body, and stress begins to change in remarkable ways. A quiet tension often lives inside the body long before a person becomes fully aware of it. The shoulders tighten, the breath becomes shallow, and the mind begins moving quickly from one thought to another. Many people describe this feeling simply as stress. Yet few stop to examine what actually creates it. Stress often begins as a reaction to uncertainty or difficulty. An unexpected situation appears, and the mind immediately tries to control it. Thoughts begin racing. What should be done next? How can the situation be fixed? What might happen if things go wrong? These questions create mental pressure. But beneath the questions lies something deeper. The mind is resisting the fact that the situation already exists. It wishes reality were different. This quiet resistance activates the body's stress response. The nervous system interprets resistance as a signal that something is wrong and must be corrected immediately. The body prepares for action. The heart beats faster, muscles become alert, breathing changes. This reaction can be useful in moments of real danger, but many stressful experiences do not involve physical threat. They involve psychological resistance. A person may worry about a future event that has not yet happened. They may replay a conversation repeatedly, hoping to find a better version of what could have been said. The body reacts to these thoughts as if the threat is present now. This is why stress often feels exhausting. The body remains in a state of alertness even when no immediate action is required. Buddhist teachings approach this pattern with remarkable clarity. They show that stress grows stronger when the mind fights reality. The mind insists that the moment should be different. It pushes against circumstances that cannot be changed instantly. This internal struggle keeps the nervous system activated. Acceptance interrupts this process. When the mind acknowledges the present moment honestly, the struggle stops. The phrase, "this is what is," becomes more than a statement of recognition. It becomes a signal to the nervous system that the fight has ended. The body begins to relax, breathing deepens, muscles soften, the mind becomes quieter. This shift may happen gradually, but its effects are profound. The person discovers that calm does not require eliminating every difficulty in life. It begins the moment resistance fades. Another important change appears in the way the mind interprets challenges. When resistance dominates perception, every problem feels like a threat. The mind believes it must solve the situation immediately or risk losing control. This urgency intensifies stress. But acceptance changes the interpretation. The person recognizes that challenges are part of life rather than interruptions to it. Instead of reacting with panic, the mind observes the situation calmly. This observation creates space for thoughtful response. The nervous system remains more balanced because the mind is not sending signals of danger. Over time, this shift rewires the relationship between the mind and stress. The person becomes less reactive to unexpected events. They no longer assume that every difficulty requires immediate emotional struggle. They recognize that many situations unfold naturally when approached with patience. Another transformation appears in the body itself. Chronic stress often results from long periods of mental resistance. When someone constantly worries about the future or resists the present, the body remains tense. This tension affects sleep, digestion, and overall health. But when acceptance becomes part of daily awareness, the body receives a different message. The message says that the moment is manageable. The nervous system responds by shifting toward relaxation. This relaxation supports healing. Sleep becomes deeper. Breathing becomes steadier. Energy that was previously consumed by tension becomes available again. The person begins to feel lighter. Another benefit of acceptance appears in decision-making. When stress dominates the mind, thinking becomes narrow. The person focuses only on escaping the problem quickly. This urgency often leads to impulsive choices, but when acceptance calms the nervous system, the mind becomes clearer. Thoughts slow down. The person can see multiple possibilities rather than reacting to a single fear. This clarity improves judgment. Decisions become more thoughtful and balanced. The person responds to situations rather than reacting blindly. Buddhist philosophy often describes this state as equanimity. Equanimity does not mean indifference. It means maintaining inner balance regardless of external circumstances. When the mind accepts reality as it unfolds, emotional reactions become steadier. Joy is experienced without clinging. Difficulty is faced without panic. This balance protects the nervous system from extreme swings between tension and relief. The body learns that stability is possible even during uncertainty. Another insight appears when someone observes how acceptance affects everyday experiences. Small inconveniences often trigger stress reactions. A delayed plan, an unexpected obstacle, or a misunderstanding may create immediate frustration. But when acceptance becomes habitual, these situations lose much of their emotional intensity. The person acknowledges the inconvenience and continues responding calmly. The nervous system remains steady. This steadiness accumulates over time. Instead of experiencing stress repeatedly throughout the day, the person moves through situations with greater ease. Moments of tension still occur, but they pass more quickly because the mind does not amplify them with resistance. Gradually, the person begins noticing that acceptance is not passive. It is an active form of awareness. It requires recognizing what is happening and allowing it to exist without immediate judgment. This awareness strengthens emotional intelligence. The person becomes skilled at observing their own reactions. When stress begins to rise, they notice it early. They pause, breathe, and acknowledge the situation clearly. This pause interrupts the automatic stress response. The body receives a signal that there is no need for panic. The mind returns to balance. Over time, this practice transforms the relationship between the mind and the nervous system. Stress no longer feels like an uncontrollable force. It becomes a signal that resistance may be present. When resistance is released, the signal fades. The person realizes that much of the tension they once carried was created by internal struggle rather than by the world itself. This realization brings freedom. Life continues presenting challenges, but those challenges no longer dominate emotional experience. The mind responds with steadiness. The body remains relaxed. Calm becomes the natural state rather than the rare exception. And as this calmer relationship with stress continues deepening, another quiet insight begins to reveal itself about how peace can grow even in the midst of uncertainty. As the mind begins to experience how acceptance softens stress and allows the body to return to balance, another deeper layer of resistance slowly becomes visible. Many people initially believe that resistance appears only because situations are painful or unexpected, but when awareness grows stronger, it becomes clear that resistance sometimes comes from something much more subtle. Beneath many struggles with reality, a quiet force often operates without being noticed. This force is the ego's need to protect the image it has created about who someone believes they are. When reality challenges that image, the mind often reacts with refusal rather than openness. Buddhist teachings gently reveal that humility dissolves this hidden tension and allows a person to meet life with far greater peace. A strange discomfort often arises when reality contradicts the image a person carries about themselves. People rarely move through life without forming certain ideas about their identity. These ideas shape how they expect the world to respond to them. A person may quietly believe they deserve respect from everyone they meet. Another may believe they are someone who rarely makes mistakes. Someone else may carry the identity of being strong, intelligent, successful, or morally right. These identities may develop gradually through experience, praise, or personal effort. Over time, they begin to feel solid. The mind grows comfortable living within them. But life does not always cooperate with these identities. Situations appear that challenge them. A person who believes they are always respected may face criticism. Someone who believes they are always correct may discover they misunderstood something. A person who prides themselves on emotional strength may find themselves overwhelmed by unexpected sadness. At these moments, something subtle occurs inside the mind. Reality presents one version of events. The ego presents another, and when these two versions do not match, resistance begins. The mind may reject the situation. It may argue internally that the criticism is unfair or that the mistake does not really count. It may blame external circumstances rather than allowing the experience to reveal something new. This reaction does not come from wisdom. It comes from the ego's desire to protect identity. The ego functions like a guard protecting a fragile story about who someone believes they are. Whenever reality threatens that story, the guard reacts quickly. It denies, deflects, or resists the truth of the moment. At first, this defense may seem helpful. It protects pride and prevents the discomfort of admitting vulnerability. But over time, it creates distance from reality. The person becomes more concerned with defending identity than with understanding the situation itself. This distance prevents growth. Buddhist philosophy approaches identity very differently. It teaches that the self-image people protect so carefully is not fixed or permanent. It is a temporary collection of thoughts, experiences, and roles. These elements change constantly as life unfolds. When someone understands this truth, the ego's need for protection begins to soften. The person no longer feels compelled to defend a rigid identity. Instead, they become open to learning from experience. Humility plays an important role in this transformation. Humility does not mean believing oneself to be inferior. It simply means recognizing that no identity is complete or permanent. A humble mind remains open to correction, growth, and new understanding. This openness reduces conflict with reality. When something unexpected happens, the person does not feel personally attacked. They simply observe the event and respond thoughtfully. Another example of ego-driven resistance appears when people struggle to admit mistakes. The ego often interprets mistakes as threats to personal worth. Instead of acknowledging the error, the mind may search for excuses. It may blame circumstances or other people. This reaction protects the self-image temporarily but prevents learning. Humility transforms this situation. When the mind becomes comfortable acknowledging imperfection, mistakes lose their emotional weight. They become opportunities for understanding rather than evidence of failure. The person can examine the situation calmly and adjust their actions in the future. This ability strengthens wisdom. Another subtle form of ego appears in the desire to appear strong at all times. Many people believe that admitting difficulty or uncertainty will make them seem weak. As a result, they hide their struggles even from themselves, but this denial often creates internal tension. The person carries emotional weight while pretending everything is under control. Humility removes this burden. When someone accepts that vulnerability is part of being human, they no longer need to maintain the illusion of constant strength. They can acknowledge difficult feelings honestly. This honesty allows emotional healing to begin. The same principle applies to disagreements. The ego often insists on being right. When someone challenges an opinion, the mind may react defensively. It focuses on winning the argument rather than understanding the other perspective. But humility changes the goal of conversation. Instead of proving superiority, the person seeks truth. They listen carefully and consider whether new information might expand their understanding. This attitude reduces conflict. It transforms debate into dialogue. Relationships improve because communication becomes more open and respectful. Another dimension of ego-driven resistance appears in expectations about life's fairness. A person may believe they deserve certain rewards because of their efforts or intentions. When life does not deliver those rewards, frustration grows. The mind feels that reality has violated an unwritten rule. But Buddhist teachings emphasize that life does not operate according to personal expectations. Events arise through complex causes and conditions. Humility allows the mind to accept this complexity. Instead of demanding that life conform to personal desires, the person learns to adapt to changing circumstances. This flexibility reduces bitterness. It allows emotional balance to return even when outcomes differ from expectations. Another important insight appears when someone observes how pride influences reactions to criticism. Criticism can feel uncomfortable because it challenges identity. The ego may respond by rejecting the feedback immediately, but humility allows the person to pause. Instead of reacting defensively, they examine the criticism carefully. Some feedback may be inaccurate, but some may contain valuable truth. Humility allows that truth to be seen without emotional resistance. The person becomes more capable of growth because they are not trapped defending a fixed self-image. Over time, humility becomes a source of strength rather than weakness. A humble mind remains flexible. It adapts easily because it is not rigidly attached to identity. This flexibility allows the person to navigate life's changes with calm awareness. When unexpected situations arise, they respond thoughtfully rather than reacting from wounded pride. The mind remains aligned with reality rather than fighting against it. Another transformation appears in the way humility affects relationships with others. When someone no longer needs to protect a rigid identity, they become more compassionate. They recognize that everyone carries their own struggles and imperfections. Instead of judging others harshly, they respond with understanding. This compassion creates connection. People feel safer around someone who does not constantly defend their ego. Conversations become more genuine. Trust grows naturally. Gradually, the person begins experiencing life with greater simplicity. They no longer need to maintain elaborate stories about who they are. They simply respond to each moment as it unfolds. Humility allows them to remain open to learning from every experience. Reality becomes a teacher rather than an opponent, and as the ego's grip loosens further, another quiet realization begins to emerge about the peaceful clarity that comes from living without constant resistance to life itself. As the mind begins to soften the grip of ego and pride, another quiet transformation becomes possible. When identity is no longer constantly defending itself, awareness becomes clearer and more spacious. Life can be seen with less distortion. Yet even after pride loosens its hold, the mind still carries another habit that quietly fuels emotional turbulence. It is the habit of judging every experience immediately. The mind constantly labels moments as good or bad, success or failure, pleasant or unpleasant. These judgments appear so quickly that they often feel automatic. But Buddhist wisdom reveals that peace grows when the mind learns a different skill. Instead of judging every moment, it begins to witness it. A silent commentary often runs through the mind from morning until night. Every experience receives an immediate evaluation. When something pleasant occurs, the mind quickly calls it good and wishes for it to continue. When something uncomfortable appears, the mind calls it bad and wants it to disappear as soon as possible. These labels seem harmless, but they quietly shape emotional reactions. Once the mind labels something as bad, resistance begins. The person feels tension and urgency to change the situation. Once the mind labels something as good, attachment begins. The person fears losing the moment and tries to hold on to it. Both reactions create instability. The mind swings between grasping and pushing away. This constant movement generates emotional turbulence. Buddhist practice introduces a different approach. Instead of immediately labeling experiences, the mind learns to observe them. Observation is simple but powerful. It means noticing what is happening without rushing to define it. When a sensation arises, the person observes the sensation. When a thought appears, they observe the thought. When an emotion moves through the body, they notice its presence. This witnessing does not require judgment. It simply acknowledges what is unfolding. At first, this practice may feel unusual. Most people have spent their entire lives reacting to experiences rather than observing them. The mind feels compelled to evaluate every moment, but with patience, witnessing becomes easier. The person begins noticing that experiences change constantly. An emotion that felt intense a moment ago begins fading naturally. A thought that seemed important loses its power when observed quietly. By watching these movements without interfering, the mind learns that many reactions were unnecessary. Another insight appears through this practice. Judgment often amplifies emotional intensity. When someone labels an emotion as wrong or unacceptable, the mind becomes tense. For example, if anger appears and the mind immediately judges it as bad, a second layer of frustration emerges. The person becomes upset not only because anger is present, but also because they believe it should not be there. This second layer intensifies the emotional experience. Witnessing removes this extra burden. The person notices the anger without condemning it. They observe how it feels in the body and how it moves through the mind. Without judgment, the emotion loses much of its intensity. It becomes easier to understand rather than something to fight. This approach also reveals the temporary nature of experience. Everything that arises eventually passes. Thoughts appear and disappear. Sensations shift constantly. Emotions rise and fall like waves. Judgment interrupts this natural flow. When the mind labels an experience strongly, it tries to hold on to it or push it away. But witnessing allows the flow to continue. The person sees experiences moving through awareness without becoming trapped by them. Over time, this awareness creates emotional balance. The mind becomes less reactive. Situations that once triggered strong responses now pass through awareness with greater ease. Another transformation occurs in the way people relate to their thoughts. Many individuals believe that every thought deserves attention. They follow each idea as if it represents truth. But witnessing reveals something surprising. Thoughts are not commands or facts. They are simply mental events. When someone observes their thoughts carefully, they notice how many of them repeat the same patterns. Some thoughts predict problems that never occur. Others revisit past events without producing new understanding. When the mind witnesses these thoughts, instead of immediately believing them, their influence weakens. The person realizes they do not need to follow every mental story. They can watch the thought appear and allow it to pass. This freedom creates calm. The mind becomes quieter because it no longer chases every idea that arises. Witnessing also strengthens awareness of the body. Many emotions first appear as physical sensations. Tension in the chest, tightness in the throat, or warmth in the face may signal an emotional shift. When someone practices mindful observation, they become sensitive to these signals. They notice how emotions begin forming before they become overwhelming. This early awareness allows the person to remain steady. Instead of reacting impulsively, they observe the sensation and allow it to move naturally. The body gradually relaxes as the emotion passes. Another important benefit appears in relationships. Judgment often creates misunderstanding between people. When someone interprets another person's behavior quickly, they may assign motives that are not accurate. A simple action may be labeled as disrespect or indifference. But when the mind practices witnessing, it becomes more patient. The person observes the situation without immediately assigning meaning. This openness allows communication to unfold more clearly. They become curious about the other person's perspective rather than reacting defensively. Relationships improve because reactions are guided by understanding rather than assumption. Witnessing also reduces self-criticism. Many people judge themselves harshly for thoughts or emotions they believe they should not experience. They may feel ashamed of anger, fear, or doubt. But mindful observation changes this relationship. The person sees these emotions as natural human experiences rather than personal failures. This understanding creates compassion toward oneself. Instead of fighting their inner world, they listen to it with patience. Compassion replaces judgment. Gradually, the mind begins experiencing life more directly. Without constant evaluation, moments feel lighter. The person notices simple details that once passed unnoticed. The sound of breathing, the movement of wind, the rhythm of conversation. These experiences become vivid because the mind is no longer distracted by endless labeling. Awareness becomes spacious. Peace grows in that space. Another important insight appears when witnessing becomes natural. The person realizes that judgment often arises from fear. The mind labels situations quickly because it wants certainty. It believes that defining something immediately will create control. But life rarely offers perfect certainty. When the mind accepts this reality, it becomes comfortable observing events without rushing to conclusions. Curiosity replaces fear. The person remains open to discovering how situations will unfold. This openness strengthens emotional resilience. Challenges still appear, but they no longer trigger immediate turmoil. The mind watches the situation carefully and responds thoughtfully. Calm replaces reaction. Over time, witnessing becomes a way of living rather than a temporary exercise. The person moves through daily life with steady awareness. Experiences continue to arise, but they are no longer trapped in cycles of judgment. They are simply observed, understood, and allowed to pass. In this quiet witnessing, acceptance deepens. Emotional turbulence fades. The mind becomes like a clear sky through which thoughts and feelings move without leaving permanent marks. And as this clarity continues to expand, another gentle realization begins to reveal itself about the quiet wisdom hidden within life's constant change. Calm does not arrive when life finally becomes perfect. It begins the moment the mind stops arguing with what already exists. Throughout these teachings, a quiet pattern reveals itself again and again. Much of the suffering people carry does not come directly from events. It grows from the struggle against them. The mind writes scripts for how life should unfold, builds identities it feels compelled to defend, clings to memories that have already passed, and labels every experience as either success or failure. In doing so, it creates an invisible battle with reality that never truly ends. But something remarkable happens when that battle stops. When expectations loosen, when the past is allowed to remain where it belongs, when emotions are witnessed rather than edited, and when reality is met with the simple honesty of saying, "This is what is," the mind begins to quiet down. Stress softens, resistance fades, and clarity begins to appear. Acceptance does not remove difficulty from life, but it removes the constant friction that makes difficulty feel unbearable. In that space, a different kind of strength emerges, a calm that does not depend on perfect circumstances, a calm that grows from understanding life as it truly is. If one idea from these teachings stayed with you tonight, share it in the comments below. Sometimes a single sentence can shift someone else's entire perspective, and your reflection might be exactly what another listener needs to hear. And if these lessons help bring even a little more clarity or calm into your mind, consider subscribing to the channel. Many more teachings like this are waiting ahead, each one designed to help the mind slow down, see clearly, and return to the quiet strength that has always been there.